All right, we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Calling Sacred Cows. This dude over here is Steven Stutts. I'm Matt Line. All right, and just in case you don't remember any of that, welcome to Calling Sacred Cows. Our names, I hope, are at least
This
underneath
dude
our
over
pictures.
here
is Steven Stutts. I'm Matt
Hopefully it's
Line.
not
All right, and just in case you don't, now you see, I have this one little problem. And that problem is I never made it out of preschool, so reading is kind of, something that I'm technically not qualified to do. So you guys will have to let me know in the chat, and don't ask me how I can understand. Uh, so anyhow, moving right along to bigger and better things. Mr. Stutz, when we were going and preparing some of the content, uh, we well, you were talking about. Well, I'm interested in knowing what your actual reaction to the content was.
Oh well, okay. First of all, I thought it was incredibly interesting, and a lot of stuff I hadn't really you always hear. For example, we have content on education and how basically um, someone who is a proponent to like Nazism and who basically wanted to create a curriculum that is designed to kind of control people, right? Like basically remove free thought from people, because people who are obstinate and people who think freely, they're hard to control and they're unpredictable, and you don't want that when it comes to basically, as Charles Tips would say, creating drones, which we'll of course get into his answers. And I didn't really I've always heard people say like it's really cliche, right, when you're talking about school, and especially public school, and I guess private school, maybe even to a greater extent, now that I think about it. But it's all, oh, they're treating us how to be drones and blah blah blah, brainwashing, all this. Like, you hear it from all the woke people with the tinfoil hats all the time. But you also hear that the earth is flat from those people. So I don't know what to believe from them. But reading these well-written and well-elaborated pieces has definitely elucidated the topic in more for me, and my view of education is getting more and more pessimistic as the days pass. So that's great.
Oh, lovely. Having a pessimistic view of education. Well, I have to say that having a pessimistic view of education kind of sucks unless you have something good to fill the void.
Yes, exactly. And we hope to fill that void.
Yes, indeed. Partially with doing these streams, partially with encouraging other people to do streams, partially encouraging people to go out and learn things themselves and to have open, honest conversations, being able to tolerate cognitive dissonance, or rather tolerate two ideas in your head for long enough to figure out and get to the bottom of an actual situation. Right. And then to be able to deal with a cognitive dissonance in a way that, when we're confronted with something that is true and conflicts against what we already believe, that we would be able to change our lives anyway, rather than get reactionary and start throwing poo everywhere.
Yes, cognitive dissonance, throw poo.
Yes.
As the old adage goes.
Bloody, bloody, blah. Cognitive dissonance, throw. Yeah, exactly. But in the meantime, and I put, at least I hope, that the links are now in the video description, or the stream description.
So people can read along.
You can, or at least I hope you can read along. Let me know if the links aren't there. Refresh the page if you need to.
Them.
Oh, good.
I'm seeing.
So our first link is Dennis Pratt's answer to the question, would you be willing to be friends with someone who had different political views than you? I'll actually put this answer up on the screen so that you can see at least what part of the answer I am scrolled to. The answer goes, for me, my political views are not random preferences or a team affiliation. They derive directly from a coherent ethic of how people should treat one another, peacefully, voluntarily, consensually, win-win. So it's a caution flag when I meet someone who has a different political view from me. My friends do not necessarily share my political views, but they do share my ethics. And so given a political view that contradicts the ethic, I do have to investigate further. Because if she is in fact someone who holds the opposite ethic, that is okay to treat other people with violence, coercion, domination, win-lose, demanding that other people involuntarily and non-consensually obey her commandments. Then, no, of course not. That is not someone with whom I would ever want to be friends. In fact, I don't think the word friend could ever mean the same to her as it does to me. She is incapable of the type of equal, loving, kind, tolerant, supportive relationship that I am seeking from someone I would call a friend. And I'm going to add, not as Dennis Pratt, but speaking for myself, that I am seeking to find friends everywhere I go. I
Oh
would
yeah.
love to be able to have these kinds of relationships with everybody that I run into. And it is ultimately the fact that we do seem to have disagreements on these things that would cause me to not be friends with someone else. I come very, very close, if not completely echo Dennis Pratt's position on this particular answer. Now I've set you up by telling you what my opinion is. So that means just like, are you my friend, Steven? Are we gonna play emotional blackmail now?
No, it was interesting for me because it pretty much cleared up a lot of like my old, like for example, I really didn't delve into politics at all before, like maybe a few months ago, I suppose, when I've like started kind of looking. I mean, I haven't. It's still been relatively cursory, but I haven't. So I don't know too much, but I've gotten a much clearer idea of what's going on by talking to people who are it's more educated about the matters than myself. And it makes sense what he's saying. Like at first, that does seem like a strong statement, right? Like you won't like political differences, and like that seems quite strong. That you wouldn't have friends who would share the same, same political views as you. And but it makes a lot more sense when you root back to values, as he quickly does. So he quickly backs up that statement with like, I don't believe you should be controlling other people. I think you should have basically control over yourself, but I think you should try your best to basically not hurt other people. But I don't like the idea that one person's opinion, because yeah, we know how easy it is to decide which opinion is correct. That's certainly a trivial task, right? Um, like, so when people get these basically really strong views and want to control others and make them basically coalesce to their whims, it sends a signal, and I don't like being around people like that. And partially, a lot of reasons why people have different political views that maybe seem antithetical to their values is often because they just haven't looked into it enough. That's generally the case. So when I have a friend who is, I don't have any exact examples because my friend, we don't talk about politics. Like my friends in real life, as far as like people I personally have known for my whole life, we don't talk about politics. But I'd presume many of us have different opinions, and we have different stances. But I believe if we could rationalize and come to a point of agreement. And this is often what I've noticed. For example, you guys may know Ethan Hillman from Quora or Hamza. I very rarely, or Hamza Muhammad, I very rarely find myself in any disagreement with them at all. And when I do, it's like semantic. It's usually semantic. And if we abstract that, it's equivalent to a semantic disagreement often. Like it's like, oh, I didn't understand it in this way, or oh, now that we're on the same page, we're all here together and we actually do see things in the same way. Very rarely do I see with people who I strongly relate to and are friends, do I see a fundamental difference in views. And I think a fundamental difference in views, it's not serviceable to have a super close relationship with someone who sees something that's very important, like vastly differently, for example. There can be slight variations, of course, but the more it diverges, I think the harder it is to have a deeper connection with that person.
Well, lots of people's political views aren't actually predicated upon uh, their value system, or rather, they're only very loosely predicated. It's almost like the government is used as this tool that lets pretend like, and I'm going to say pretend like democracy works for a moment. 51% of people, assuming you get the right crowd of people to show up to vote on any given day, you can go and put people into power and enact policies where 51% of the constituents can determine what 49% of the constituents do
Right.
against their will. And government has so long been understood to be this thing where you basically have people fighting for power to coerce other people to do things, that having a completely different view as to what the whole purpose of government is and the whole role that government should take in life can often be a gigantic shock to people. So I find that one of the most useful things, besides streaming and having these conversations with larger groups of people, is inviting people over to our place and just having economic conversations, having political conversations, asking important questions, and being willing to go through the process of having this huge emotional reaction to having the very tenets of belief that have kind of implicitly existed from the point one grows up in an authoritarian society questioned and often systematically removed. It's amazing how capable people are of thinking about these things rationally when given an emotionally safe environment in which to do so.
Yes, exactly. We should continue with more of his answer.
Well,
Do you
certainly.
think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the rest of it though seems to be more just giving examples of the different kinds of people
Right.
that there are.
Yeah, so I don't think we should go in
Yeah.
exact necessarily detail, but we should definitely synthesize some of the ideas.
Yes.
So
Well, he says
I
here.
really like.
He says here, I have to be careful. So a few people share my politics, and not all of them embrace bad ethics. In other words, so few people share my politics. Most people are mindlessly following what they were told was good, or they make an exception in the area of politics, an exception they were indoctrinated to make, that the same ethics they follow without fail in their private lives do not apply to their rulers. So if someone doesn't share my politics, it doesn't prove that I'm dealing with a dangerous person yet, until I dive deeper. That person is not yet safe enough to start recruiting as a friend. Now, he uses the term psychopath completely wrong here.
Yeah.
But the kinds of people he's referring to, I would say, would be more malignant sociopaths would be probably a more useful term here. So people that wind up essentially subsisting along with the system as a cancer, or people that are constantly just perpetuating evil and would, if they get into positions of government, use that power to coerce people to do all sorts of things that are bad.
Yep.
And they say most people think that it would be easy to identify who these people are, but they ignore the banality of evil. These people don't start out wearing swastikas or flying the hammer and sickle. They look just like regular folk. They have families and kids and, yes, cookouts. And then they will use their government power to order the deaths of thousands, of hundreds of thousands, and even of millions of people, and they will come home and relax after a stressing day. Here's an example. There's Che Guevara. He's doing the conga line with a bunch of apparently young high school age students. There's Fidel Castro with a bunch of children who are wearing the Fidel Castro beard. And here's a picture of Adolf Hitler being with children and seemingly really enjoying it. And I'm not going to say in any kind of a pedophiliac way, but just actually
Yeah,
getting
just
along
being.
with kids.
Hmm.
Then
Oh
he
yeah.
talks about having a mob boss friend that you try not to piss off because, well, you don't want to be dead if things happen. But generally, you kind of keep those sorts of people at arm's length, as you would also do with
Oh yeah.
narcissists.
Hmm.
Then
I have
there
an
were.
exact
Hmm.
example of that
Oh,
in
please
real
do.
life. Yeah. Um, so in high school, I got really, really into well, like in high school, I really hated the curriculum, and I couldn't pay attention for the life of me, ADD and stuff, um, and I was kind of just sort of had bad habits. So in class, I would either be on my phone looking at memes and stupid things like that, or or I'd look around and like watch. I really was interested, and I did this. This one of the first things I did when I was little was look around and like just watch people, like what are they doing, and watching and just seeing what's going on, right? So
Hmm.
so I became pretty good at basically diagnosing, like, like I just figured people are a general sense. Like I got heuristics and stuff, and by spending a lot of my focus and watching these people, I was able to figure out, for example, like I diagnosed some people in my head. I didn't say this out loud. That's really, you don't do that. But I was like, okay, I think this person's like this, and then later it might be confirmed by their psychiatrist or like sometimes they'd be close enough to me that I would realize that yes, that is the case. Actually, they were officially diagnosed with that thing, and there was this girl with narcissistic personality disorder. It was pretty glaring, and so I like psychology was really interesting to me, and so I'm watching this girl, and she was really smart, a great artist, very talented. Like she was like and she was pretty on top of that too. So, but it was still narcissistic personality disorder, and these traits would have been arrived regardless of if she had any of those credentials to back it up. It's just the way she was built. Um, and I recognize that with an antisocial personality disorder, like I recognize like the shit that she was saying and stuff like kind of wasn't all her fault. You know what I mean? Like it was her fault that she was saying these bad things, and it did come from her, but I didn't fault her. I held her to a lower standard than other people, and I was continuously like I basically I treated her as a friend, and I was nice to her, and a lot of people just they reacted as I think they should have. They're like, okay, screw that. We're keeping them way more than an arm's distance away. We're not going to hang out with this person. But I was really interested in the neurodiversity, and I was interested in seeing, okay, let's see, like, let's just be nice to this person, and it did not go well. Like it was not a good idea to hold this person as an arm's length and just continuously be reasonable as they kind of do more and more bad things. Um, and yeah, it came back to bite me in the butt socially, and like I'm not going to go into the details, but yeah, don't treat everyone with respect and stuff, but like yeah, those people you should definitely stray away from. I was just in my curiosity kind of blinded by the potential consequences of what I was doing, and kind of curiosity killed the cat type thing, but obviously I'm
Well,
fine.
it certainly can happen that way. And the interesting thing about dealing with narcissists, is that whereas neurobiology is difficult and sometimes impossible to change, you can still instill with people the right kinds of habits, but oftentimes these people wind up having to experience the negative consequences of their actions before they decide to change. And if they have people in their lives that are enabling the narcissism or enabling whatever bad sort of, socially maladaptive or just plain old evil tendency, then they're never going to have an instance of changing. And I'm going to go and bring up something that may or may not be popular amongst this the crowd of people that would watch this either now or in the future, just happening upon this. And it has to do with the way that we treat bullies. Bullies, the psychopathic variant and the narcissistic variant, do not respond to pleas for empathy. Bullies respond to one thing and to one thing only: a show of force in whatever way they use it. So if it's verbal, you need to up their game in such a way that you calmly, yet unequivocally, go and say, hey, this is not good behavior. We will not tolerate it. And you expose it to everyone. And basically make it known that, hey, I will not enable this behavior, and I will not be complicit in anybody else enabling this behavior, so don't do this around me. And if you calmly state that and you openly and honestly go about it, well then you're able to you would be able to pull an awful lot of this sort of stuff off.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Pratt continues and says, I've had trouble completing this essay because of the numerous categories of dangerous people. So to get this particular essay out of my drafts folder, I'm going to skip over a bunch of the categories: true believers, social engineers, cronies, sadists, nihilists, thieves, organized groups such as Antifa, BAMN, Nazis, knee-jerks, bureaucrats, apologists, the envious, the greedy, bossy, bosses, and men, children. And jump over to the two largest groups. And he goes and he says minions and drones. So basically, minions are people that, when given power, let it get to their head. And drones are people that just go through minds with their brains turned in the off position. If you are interested, you can look up the Stanford Prison Experiment for minions. It was basically an experiment in which people wanted. I'm trying to think. A guy who was really, really high up in the American.
Really interesting.
Was it? Can't even recall the name of the dude. Was it Phil Zimbardo? Had an experiment where he randomly assigned people as guards or prisoners, and in putting them in the roles, they wound up adopting the roles too well, and the guards actually wound up abusing the prisoners, and they had to cut the study short. And nobody's ever done a study like that since, because everyone knows that ultimately human nature is such that people fall into those roles altogether too easily. Mm-hmm. So don't be the kind of a person that turns into,
which also points to the power of labels in general.
Yes. And drones, people that don't think, people that will just automatically follow authority. And this is the Milgram's experiment, which is finding that well over 50% of people were willing to administer a fatal shock, or what they thought was a fatal shock, just because boss man says to do that. So we will conclude with Dennis's wonderful admonition and encouragement: don't be a sheepy. Think for yourself.
And was Milgram's? I want to, because I think I remember it. I thought I was like, when I read it when you sent it to me, I thought I remembered what it was. So I didn't like re-look at it. But it was essentially right. There was it was like you couldn't see the person in the other room, and they're connected to. It's fake, right? They're not actually getting shocked.
Yeah.
But it's an actor or something, and they're increasing the voltage with each shock
until a point where the person is unconscious, and the thing is labeled very clearly that if you push this button, you will administer a fatal shock, and the people do it anyway just because the dude in a lab coat says
it was
you
more
must
than
continue the experiment.
It was a majority of people.
Yes, it was.
And
I think it was like 70%, if I'm not mistaken. But don't quote me on that number.
It was approaching 70. for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Something like 67 to 70 or something like that. And yeah, and the person would say things like, "Yo, I have a heart problem." They would say things like things that would make you, okay, I don't want to do this, and still, because an authority is, oh no, it's okay, keep doing it. They agreed to this. They just stopped thinking, and it and I guess it's sort of in some ways it's a byproduct of a lot of things we do are automatic, and a lot of things the way society is structured and such is there's people who are experts in what they do, right? And so we trust them because we can't be experts in everything, and specialization is necessary for society to persist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't, just because you don't necessarily understand more than the expert, that you shouldn't just turn off your common sense, essentially. Like, you definitely need to be wary and use reason. Like, it's common sense. It's not, people always like to say, oh, it's uncommon sense. Well, it's not uncommon. It's just the fact that some people just neglect to use it. I think everyone has the capacity to realize that was wrong, but they weren't like thinking, basically, because there's an authority, so they just take their hands off the wheel. It's really easy to be complacent. So it's definitely something I try to watch out for when I'm doing things, because I've done not similar things to that, but I've definitely taken my hands off the wheel and let other people make decisions for me when you need to like, that's probably not in my best interest.
All right. Here's another piece. This is a piece on culture. And it's entitled, As America Resolves Its Cold Civil War, We Must Ensure It Doesn't Get Hot. And I think that what they mean by cold civil war here, and feel free to follow along, because I don't agree with everything that's stated in this article, but this is just kind of a starting point, a discussion piece, so to speak, almost like a centerpiece for what it is that we're doing here. But I think the basic premise of this is that you have left and you have right. You have authoritarians, you have libertarians, you have uh, people that are pro-free thought, people that are anti-free thought. You have both Republicans and Democrats falling anywhere along this line as to what is the role of government, what should it be able to do, what shouldn't it. But ultimately, you do wind up having the Democratic Republican split, and depending upon who winds up, for example, long-term controlling the House and the Senate, especially those that control the Senate, will have a huge say in making social and fiscal policy in the United States. So, because this is at such a deep level, touching so many people, um, there exists a very high likelihood, and I would wish it wouldn't be this way, that 51% of the people are going to get their way, and 49% of the people aren't, and are going to have to live with it. And this entire article basically talks about how it is that it wouldn't behoove us to get into a civil war over this, and warns us. It's interesting. It encourages us to treat the situation like Abraham Lincoln did, which was essentially trying to let people do their own thing. So it was basically an appeal to libertarianism. But at the same time, acknowledging that human nature might not let it work due to the fact that people so much want to use the strong arm of the government to compel other people to act in accordance with their values. I'm perfectly fine with having a certain, for example, the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to pursuit of happiness or property. The some of the Lockean ideals. But then, when it comes to other things, uh, I would just say, let the government stay out of it. Let the government not impinge upon other people's rights to life, liberty, or property, and let people figure these things out for themselves, and only use the might of the government to uh, stand up for citizens in cases where the citizen couldn't necessarily stand up for himself in preserving his own life, liberty, or property. But this advocates for a more night watchman or minarchist form of government than the gigantic behemoth of a bunch of administrative entities that are in existence today. So basically, this article is here for the purpose of the title, and saying that it doesn't have to turn out one way. It doesn't have to turn out in the way that the side that gains control of the House, of the Senate, and of the executive branch uh, goes and ruins the lives of others. It can also be such that the people that we decide to put into positions of power, because ultimately, we're voting for them, and we can pick who we vote for in the primaries, and we can pick the people that we put up for election. But ultimately, the battles are won here, where we're talking right now. Where you guys are talking, where people can get together over the dinner table and have these conversations about what principles actually matter. Because if you do wind up getting the right things on a grassroots level, and over the course of a generation, you actually change the minds of the people in the face of whatever indoctrination or brainwashing or social signals are constantly sent their way, it's entirely possible to generate at least a better society than what it is we have today by um, teaching people virtue. So my conclusion to the way of preventing civil war from happening, which it's always kind of been on the table. I mean, it's happened before. I'm not going to go and be one of the people that goes and says, "Oh, it's going to happen. People are going to be in civil war." Blah, 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 blah. I'm scared of it because I ultimately do trust that the people that are ill intentioned are so few and far in between that if the people in the United States are shown how to and given the opportunity to um, function independently of the government in as much as possible, uh, that they will be able to, at least to a large extent, learn to exist without depriving one another of our basic human rights.
Oh yeah, I agree. Let's see. Reading about the articles. And so okay, so that's doesn't give you Civil War. I'm seeing if I have anything to input on that. Just glossing over it. Let's see. Interesting. Yeah.
So this
No, I agree.
so this particular article talks about progressivism versus, I guess you could call it conservatism, or classical liberalism.
Oh,
So that means,
yeah. So okay, can I check my understanding real
go
quickly?
ahead.
Was it so? It was more like I'm what I attached to. I mean, I read this early in the morning, so I don't remember too much. But
Mm-hmm.
what I attached was basically the more the contemporary, like say, liberal view was that like human needs and like rights and etc. is just changing as time moves on, and essentially like the progressivism is essentially the like sort of variability that comes with what we need to provide for people. And
Mm-hmm.
then the more conservative view was that like these rights that we already laid out in the Constitution are what we need to continue to uphold, and or something along those lines.
Yes. The,
Okay.
the 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 basic idea, you got it. And unfortunately, this article doesn't necessarily use all the terms that would be philosophically appropriate. Like if you talk about classical liberalism, that would be operating very much along the lines of Lockean ideals, which we can go into at some later stream if you guys are interested.
Hmm.
Um, the, um, the basic idea of there being that's actually why the United States is a republic. The difference between a democracy and a republic is a republic can have democratic processes, but democracy is never allowed to or given the opportunity to vote on things that would cause human rights to be in the balance. There's already a system of human rights up here that is held to a high standard. Uh, for example, life, liberty, and property, or life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, being held up here as ideals. Anything that is enacted by legislature cannot violate this. That is the purpose of republicanism. Then, when you go and start inserting only the democratic process, so if you're dealing with only a democracy, uh, the um, the saying goes, democracy is two wolves and one sheep voting on what's for dinner. So, depending on the rules, you can have 51% ganging up on 49, or you can have 66% ganging up on 34, or what have you. Uh, it's But I will have you know that I am not a proponent of unfettered democracy. It is a form of oppression of a completely different type. It's not one person oppressing, it's 51% oppressing.
Right.
But either whoever's doing the oppressing, I am against it. Because I do hold to this system of basic human rights that I hold supreme to all the rest of the stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
so
agree.
so so in this article, I guess I would, if I were forced to put myself into one of the camps, into one of the groups, I would be amongst those that would be understanding things in terms of the founders' constitution and so forth. Now, I'm not saying that things can't get better, but I am saying that all attempts at improvement should be made without jumping on the rights of anybody else.
I agree.
Let's go
Don't
on
have
to
much
our
more.
next article, unless you had something
Yeah,
else that you wanted to say.
I had nothing more to say about that one.
I
This,
picked this third one here as kind of a hat tip to Mr. Caleb Beers in his stream. It's entitled "The West Isn't Committing Suicide, It's Dying of Natural Causes." So, Jonah Goldberg wrote a book entitled "Suicide of the West." And John Daniel Davidson contends that Jonah Goldberg's "Suicide of the West" fails to acknowledge that the threat to liberal democratic capitalism is far deeper than tribalism or nationalism gone awry. So, Jonah Goldberg's position is that the forces of tribalism, populism, and nationalism now threaten to undermine a liberal order that has brought unprecedented prosperity to the world. John says that Goldberg's book and its underlying thesis have been getting a lot of attention lately, especially among conservatives. It's certainly a timely argument. The liberal order is clearly under threat these days from left and right alike, so it's little wonder that Goldberg's message is resonating with a large audience. Among conservatives, Suicide of the West has been almost universally praised. Yuval Levin, Waxing hyperbolic in National Review declared, more than any book published so far in this century, it deserves to be called a conservative classic. But is his argument fundamentally conservative? I, meaning the author, is not sure it is. Goldberg calls the emergence of the liberal order the miracle, because we can't exactly account for why it emerged about 300 years ago. Given the sweep of evolutionary history, he says, the material progress of the past 3 centuries is not natural. The natural state of mankind is grinding poverty, punctuated by horrific violence, terminating with an early death. But something happened to disrupt the natural state of mankind. Around the year 1700, in a corner of the Eurasian landmass, humanity stumbled into a new way of organizing society and thinking about the world, writes Goldberg. It was as if the great parade of humanity had started walking through a portal to a different world. The problem now, he argues, is that we've lost perspective on how good things are, on how uniquely prosperous the liberal era has been in the long slog of human history. What's more, the miracle is fragile. It didn't spring unbidden from human nature. It was chosen, and it can be unchosen. To preserve it, we must reject the rising tide of tribalism, populism, and nationalism and rediscover a sense of gratitude for what we have. More than that, we have to pass the miracle along to each successive generation or it will vanish. Goldberg invokes Hannah Arendt's aphorism that in every generation Western civilization is invaded by barbarians. We call them children. No doubt Goldberg certainly wants to conserve many good things like capitalism, private property, free speech, and democracy. Alright, I'm going to take issue to say that conserving democracy per se is a bad thing, but a democratic republic I can get behind. But he fails to offer a full account of why the liberal order is at risk in the first place and why so many Americans are not as grateful for it as they should be. Despite all this prosperity, despite things being better than they've ever been, it doesn't feel like it. Why? Perhaps it has something to do with the liberal order itself, and not just tribalism or nationalism gone awry. Perhaps the miracle, wondrous as it is, needs more than just our gratitude to sustain it. Perhaps the only thing that can sustain it is an older order, one that predates liberal democratic capitalism and gave it its vitality in the first place. Maybe the only way forward is to go back and rediscover the things we left behind at the dawn of the Enlightenment. Hat tip to Caleb Beers. This is the part where we take a dump on modernity. Goldberg.
Jacob Plank. Oh, you go. Oh, well, Jacob Blank had some interesting things to say in the chat.
All right. Well, I will take a look, but if you would like to respond to them, that
I'll
would
read
be
it.
great.
I can read it. It says, how do you reconcile the idea that democracy leads to oppression with the idea that the free market produces the best outcomes? Given that when the majority of people are permitted to make bad choices with regards to what they want from the markets, this changes society in a way that negatively affects those who would not have made those choices. For instance, smartphones have changed the pace of life so that those who do not own them can no longer keep up with basic responsibilities.
What you are describing in terms of free market has nothing to do with democracy. Those are quite far from each other. You can say the free market selected for democracy, but no. The way democracy came about was people with democratic ideals tried to rather supplant a republican system with democracy. Democracy and free market are not the same. Democracy is a means of coming to political conclusions, which involves everyone voting. Democracy can most definitely lead to oppression because 51% decide what other people do. A free market, if I have 51% of the population telling me and 49% of people that want to say buy a Samsung phone that no, you're not buying a Samsung, you're buying an iPhone. Is that free? Is that free market? The will of the majority in a free market, the will of the majority does not take precedence because markets are decided at the margins. Do we produce more or less of something? If there's 300 million people, it's just an easy number, 300 million people or 500 million people in a country, that's an easy number. If there's 500 million people in a country and 100 million of them want an iPhone, then the free market will produce 100 million iPhones at a price that is suitable to 100 million people. And if it wants 100 million Samsungs, well, then the same thing will happen. But nowhere in this is this saying that there's a will of the majority. It is a will of the people that want the iPhone.
To me, the comparison I would make is it's just much more precise than
Yes.
say uh, than say like when we vote and 51% of people get basically the say, right?
Mm-hmm.
The free market sort of it's variable enough, and it has enough say refresh rate to kind of keep up with the changing needs of everyone around it. So it's much more adaptable in
Yeah.
that sense.
Free market is I get what I want, you get what you want. Meaning Jacob gets what you want, David gets what David wants, Stephen gets what Stephen wants, and so on. And we decide how to balance scarce resources through basically making deals and haggling over price. Well,
Well, I don't know if it's
okay,
want in particular. Like,
okay, Mr. Blank, does society force you to have an iPhone? I don't have an iPhone. I have a Huawei uh, gigantic tablet that doubles as a phone because I was able to get one of those on discount for a very, very low price. And I don't buy an internet subscription due to the fact that instead of an internet subscription, I can use my phone as a hotspot. Okay, there's this level of ingenuity, and there's the fact that if something gets to be too expensive or prohibitively bad in a free market, someone else will go and come up with something better.
yeah.
And if I find it, then I will go and uh, make use of that better resource. Oh, well, if you want to have a mobile device and you would prefer not to have one, you could go and structure your life in such a way that you don't need it. Go live on a farm, start us some hydroponics, get some solar panels, uh, cultivate a garden, you know, I think, let's say you have a family of four, you could live very comfortably on an acre and a half. You could have goats or cows. You could have. You don't have to, right? Free market. You can go and fill your acre and a half with whatever you want. Um, but you don't need to operate on the paradigm that other people give you. If you're not in debt, so obviously that forces you to operate within a particular paradigm to be able to pay back your debt. But if you are essentially free, you can go and make whatever you want of your life.
Oh, and David asked a question.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, Chris Langan said that moral intrinsic value is distributed within and between individual persons. That the universe, essentially God in his view, has teleological utility. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And I'm wondering, has it or seeks to maximize it? That's one question. I'm assuming
Where we seeks to maximize it.
it, it just says has. I was wondering if it says. I added the does it seek to maximize.
All right. So Chris Lang said that moral intrinsic. Let me read this for myself because
Yeah, go
uh
for it.
because Chris Langan has an interesting view on God in that it's kind of a and you can correct me if I'm wrong here because I haven't looked at his CTMU for a very long time, but it seems like a very naturalistic cop out. And so that's a value statement. I don't know about distributed within and between individual persons because what's a person, right? Am I a person? Uh, am I the same person I am in another 20 years when most of my biological mass is guaranteed to not be this? Uh, is a dog a person? Is an ape a person? Is my wife a person? I mean, after all, she's female and I'm male. Am I a person? After all, I'm male and she's female. You know, there's so much ambiguity here, and ultimately I believe in a transcendent reality in which all human beings intrinsically have the same worth as human beings.
Right, but when you say teleological utility, I'm assuming that means each person like serves a purpose or they have some finality, and I don't necessarily. I could be misinterpreting, but I don't. I don't know if that is essentially the case. I don't know.
Well, I'm not entirely certain that. Okay, so teleological utility. What does that even mean?
Well, so I'm gonna
Because
assume,
isn't teleological meaning that basically you can logically determine that in the end there is
like
something.
for example
I'm going based upon Latin. Okay, so tele means at the end, and logical means logos or essentially word. So does that have to do with there being some sort of a final say? Does that have to do
right.
with
So
because teleological is one of these rarely used words that I don't know if it has quite an appropriate definition. So when you say
right.
teleological utility, I mean you could very well
Well,
be, saying gibberish at this point.
right. The
Very,
way
very
I
difficult
interpret
for
it,
me to answer that.
so I looked it up because I was not familiar with the word, and like so, for example, Aristotle, I read on Wikipedia, said that like the telos of an acorn is to become a fully grown oak tree. And so I'm assuming it's basically people like fitting in some way and having some sort of like role to fill that they is I don't know, predetermined. I really don't know, and I don't think I can comment on the matter in any really really solid in any really solid manner. So I'm.
Well, I would, if the universe has any teleological utility, based off of everything I know about it, I would have to say that that utility is death.
Yeah. Yep. Or at least the conservation of energy or something.
Yeah. So that's pretty dark and dreary at that point. But I'm not certain if this even comes close to answering your question.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit. It feels a bit semantic. Teleological, says Philip. I guess that might be.
Teleological. Well, prove. All right. Prove to me that in Latin they didn't say telos instead of telos. Prove to me anything about the pronunciation of a dead language. Uh, but that's neither here nor there. You all know what exactly it means, and if you're going to be pedantic, I don't want to deal with that. It's just complete total horse crap.
I think he's
Okay,
joking.
Mr. Sanderson responds, I think he means we have value because God decided he had value and we're each part of God. Prove it. Um,
That's hard to. I don't know.
so, okay, yeah, and I'm not asking you, David, obviously, to prove it, but I'm just saying that that is not, um, This universalistic view of God is not one I hold to. So obviously, I'm going to say I disagree. But the reasons for my disagreement isn't something that I could just hash out in 20 minutes in a stream. Uh, that's called you buying a plane ticket and you're spending like 2 weeks at my place. And we're talking about it from dinner time until bedtime every single day, and we might scratch the surface. And I don't mean to treat this flippantly at all because it's a very serious topic. But still, there's an awful lot for us to continue to explore in this stream.
Right.
For
This
example,
could, you go.
uh, going back to our what we were talking about before, taking a dump on modernity, so to speak. Goldberg is not very interested in taking a dump on modernity or looking at things that happened before the Enlightenment. He doesn't ask whether there might be some contradictions at the heart of the liberal order, whether it might contain within it the seeds of its undoing. Instead, Goldberg makes his stand on rather narrow grounds. He posits that the Enlightenment miracle can be defended in purely secular, utilitarian terms, which he supposes are the only terms skeptics of liberal democratic capitalism will accept.
Yeah.
So, if you're so the general idea is that you can't go and try to perpetuate an idea if it's predicated upon a value system that is no longer being held by the people that are trying to perpetuate it. Like that's like trying to throw pure ethanol into an engine that's designed to run on 98 octane gasoline or better.
Right.
You're going to gunk up the engine and it's not going to work. And it's not going to work until you first clean out the gunk and then put 98 octane back into it. So here we are, the problem with man's conquest of nature. We mustn't kid ourselves about the miracle. We have to be honest not just about its benefits but also its costs. In The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis does this by making a startling case for the unity of applied science and magic. A unity almost no one today would admit, yet Lewis understood that science and magic are unified not only in their aims, but also in their departure from the wisdom of earlier ages. So we're talking about this more from a philosophic sense here. Like
Yeah.
science, and magic are not at all
Right.
equivalent in what it is they can accomplish because
But
one is
in
real and the
metaphor.
other ain't. Uh, but
Right.
but so I'm going to ask that you stick with me while I read this because the author actually has a very cogent point to make, but does so in a weird way because, well, he's writing an article and that's how he's decided to do it. For the wise men of old, the cardinal problem had been how to conform the soul to reality, and the solution had been knowledge, self discipline, and virtue. He writes, for magic and applied science alike, the problem is how to subdue reality to the wishes of men. The solution is technique, and both in the practice of this technique are ready to do things hitherto regarded as disgusting and impious, such as digging up and mutilating the dead. Now, I'll tell you right now, I don't particularly care about whether or not one digs up and mutilates the dead, but the whole point is that there's a system of rules and ways that people did conduct themselves by at one point that was predicated upon knowledge, self-discipline, and virtue, and trying to coexist in reality and make the most of reality, as opposed to the idea that reality is something that should be bent.
Right.
In other words, maybe it might be overreaching for us to have all of the the hubris to think that we actually know what's best and that we can
Right.
do what we think we can do. So, as
Right.
for the aims of science and magic, Lewis argues that Sir Francis Bacon, the chief trumpeter of the new era of applied science, was as little interested in knowledge for the sake of truth as a Marlowe Faustus, who struck his bargain with the devil not for truth but for power. For Bacon, the true object is to extend man's power to the performance of all things possible. He rejects magic because it does not work, but his goal is that of the magician. Lewis's larger argument in The Abolition of Man is that man's conquest of nature is chimerical. It ends with nature's conquest of man. Having debunked all tradition and morality through the wonders of applied science, having I don't think that science needs debunked tradition and morality, but the decisions we make does. But having done this, having succeeded in reducing all human life to mere biological functions that can be precisely manipulated, mankind will be henceforth free to make our species whatever we wish it to be. But therein lies the problem, says Lewis, without any standards by which to judge what man ought to be. This new species of mankind will be reduced to following the mere whims of pleasure and instinct. When all that says it is good has been debunked, what says I want remains. In an entirely conditioned society, even those who do the conditioning will be slaves, ruled by nature, not by reason. In fact, it's partially due to this that I will go and I'll ruin the way this looks for a while. Culling sacred cows, pursuing the good, the true, and the beautiful by systematically pushing the limits of taboo thought. And this is, make no mistake about it, a limit of taboo thought. It is taboo for us in this day and in this age, being in the information age, in the scientific era, to say that there are things that are objectively good. To say that there are things beyond merely our desires. But nevertheless, people functioned for millennia under those particular suppositions, and we were fine as humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that in the face of what it is that we are doing, we need to at least explore the idea of morality as transcendent and extrinsic to the empirical. In other words, I would say, what if we were to imagine morality as an idea that isn't just one based off of popular consensus, but morality actually being one uh, based off of well, uh, something extrinsic to us that the old folks, the ancient folks, might have actually gotten right.
Right. Yeah, it's actually, that was extremely interesting.
Ah, Mr. Free
And
Real Estate is going to what? Oh, great.
it'll come back when
When,
education
when
comes up.
education comes up. Okay, cool. Sounds great. Education will actually be coming up quite shortly, but there's still
There's still
a few other things to unpackage here still.
Yep.
But we will probably go through that quite quickly. So it's easy to, in the unleashing of our animals' desires and irrational impulses, nature will have its final victory over man at the very moment of our supposed triumph. All nature's apparent reverses have been but tactical withdrawals, writes Lewis. We thought we were beating her back when she was luring us on. What looked to us like the hands held up in surrender was really the opening of arms to enfold us forever. So the real question is are we killing ourselves as humanity, maybe just killing what it means to be human, and so on, by our blind pursuit of progress. And it's something to think, because I would say
Debatable.
certain kinds of progress are great. Other kinds of progress are, things that we wouldn't necessarily want to have. But how do we know what that is unless we have some sort of objective moral framework in which to work? So, our big conclusion is right here in this big heading: liberalism gives us freedom, but can't tell us what to do with it. The miracle gave us capitalism and democracy, but it also gave us hyper-individualism, scientism, and communism. It gave us liberty and universal suffrage, but it also gave us abortion, euthanasia, and transgenderism. Okay, so this person is clearly on the religious right. But the abolition of man was written into the Enlightenment, in other words, and the suicide of the West that Goldberg warns us about isn't really a suicide at all, because it isn't really a choice. We aren't committing suicide, we're dying of natural causes. So if we're picking things that ultimately goes and destroys the human race, both in terms of the mental faculties that make it, or just the fact that we might wind up having a nuclear holocaust, or generating AI that could potentially take over the world, which is something that Elon Musk is concerned about, and so on. Um, once again, I think that would also be a little hyperbolic, but still something to be concerned about happening in the distant future, because technological advance is so big. We need to have the morals to determine how it is we interface with the rest of the world. And as soon as you throw out the morals, then rather than being in control, we become slaves. That's the general idea of this article. So either you're a slave to morality or you're a slave to passion. There is no difference, because ultimately something is governing what it is that we do.
Right. And it said like how in the article it was talking about how he wasn't even focusing on like the kind of like how democracy sort of falls apart, and like basically the symptoms essentially of the root problem. And is it fair to say that he almost sees it like kind of like a dichotomy, in that either it's one or the other, it's really hard to combine the two,
Mm-hmm.
when considering essentially conforming to nature, conforming to morality, or conforming to your pleasure. It's very is it fair to say that he would see that as sort of a dichotomy?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, then I understand.
Yeah. Well, it ultimately has to do with our will being bound to something.
Right.
And we paradoxically have some amount of choice into what it is we bind our will to,
Yeah, right.
but still not completely. So,
Yeah,
so,
it's
so, so what
open-ended.
happens to humanity versus what happens to any individual one of us? Because we do act differently as a herd than as we do as individuals, which is another
Yep.
reason why I like having people over as individuals and small groups over to our dinner table, as opposed to, literally inviting a herd to stampede through our kitchen. So
It's
with
an open-ended future and lack of a binding past that marks our age, basically. Young people especially. And yeah, I agree with the young people part. Everyone's just existential and pretty much directionless.
hmm
Many people are, and that's, yeah.
well,
And you can see it reflected in the art we create, if you want to call memes art, which essentially I guess they are. I mean, if you look at them, they're just the current one. I'm like, they're just existential. Like there's no rhyme or reason to them. They're just fundamentally like just trying to get dopamine. That's what it feels like, is like a dopamine pull. But like just completely nonsensical. I don't know if anyone knows exactly what I'm talking about, but like,
hmm
yeah, the
yeah,
meaning seems to be sapped out of things.
yeah.
in this
Uh,
pursuit of learning.
very much so. Yeah, yeah. Art is a big reflection of that.
Yeah,
What say you we go to the subject of education?
sure. I will go ahead and
You can let your
proceed.
friend know.
Yep.
Uh, Here we have Charles Tipp's answer to why has there been a breakdown of education and critical thinking in the U.S.? And I can start by reading this, but I would really, really, really like it if you would, in a very big way, kind of take this particular portion of the conversation,
Sure.
because this is definitely right up your alley. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I of course have opinions, but you said that you really, really liked the way that Charles took all these different seemingly esoteric things, or all these different inaccessible things, or kind of shown a light to let you know when is somebody being a tinfoil hat weirdo and when is somebody actually having a legitimate point.
Right. So yeah. So I'm gonna reference his answer in doing this as well.
Okay,
So
would you
it's
mind going and kind of giving a bit of context first, or reading it or something before we talk about it?
context as far as the question, or context as far as my education, or
Context as well. Actually, could you tell a bit about your education first?
yeah. So I was completely mainstreamed in a public, small, not small. I guess my high school was about 1,000 people. It's, I suppose, like a normal size, about 300 per. Well, it was 1,000 people, but there were only 3 grades. A freshman year was junior high, and so I was completely mainstreamed, and I was kept at grade level. There was no altercation. I didn't go in any special classes. Didn't go any. So basically, it's a dead average education. Basically, the most normal you can expect. Our school was pretty shit and rated as shit, but that's beside the point. The structure is fundamentally the same, as far as what you're going to see basically anywhere. Um, and yeah, if I can detail my path. So basically, I'm at elementary school. All I did was get in trouble, continuously every day. Sent to the principals all the time. It just acted out. Yeah, I was not having fun in school really. Um, I also have ADD as well, or diagnosed ADD, like inattentive type. So that obviously didn't really help things, and I'm twice exceptional as well. So that throws another interesting, um, you know, basically constraint in there. And then yeah, then it was pretty much shit. We didn't. There was no focus on first principles ever in school. And because I could figure out first principles, and I was treated as some sort of magician by teachers and sometimes students, because I tried to figure things out and understand them rather than just rote memory.
Oh
Um,
wow!
yeah, well, who would have thought like that would be a thing, right?
Who thought that actually
No.
understanding something helps?
Um, and in fact, when I tried to, so I'm an extrovert. I like I really like interacting. When I learn something new, I love talking about it. Love asking questions, no matter what. So whatever class, I asked a ton of questions. I probably asked the most questions of anyone in that I know of in every single class I was in. Even if I wasn't paying attention, I would see something on the board. I'd see one thing, and then I'd have to ask a question about it. So maybe if I paid attention, the class would kind of get stuck up, right? Because I'd be
Yeah.
asking so many. But
Mm-hmm.
I realized that teachers don't generally like that. So when I was little, I'll start when I was little. I mean, I was so inundated with ADD that like my teachers all said I was in Stephen Land. Stephen Land was a lot better than what we were doing in school. So I'm kind of happy that I just could space out and pull off. And I remember like asking my peers in kindergarten, like trying to, because I like teaching. I really liked teaching. I remember, asking them like, hey, guys, what's 1 plus 1? And of course, everyone knew 2. And then I just got, well, guess what's 100 plus 100? Trying to trying to explore concepts that I think we were doing counting and stuff, and I don't know what we were doing at what level, but I remember trying to, from as far back as I can remember.
Well, it's one group of 100 plus another group of 100. That's two groups of
Right,
100 or
exactly.
200, and then people get
Exactly.
confused.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that wouldn't stick. And I was just confused. I was like, what? What's going on? How is
Mm-hmm.
this? This is how it is. Am I thinking about it wrong? I was like, this is what's going on. And then so in high school, I became, so I was so out of it, like just spaced out. I never paid attention, never did anything. Like, I basically didn't recognize how shit school was. Like I just was there and like, okay, getting all right grades, getting, A's and B's and stuff like that. And oh, okay, just floating through like in this fugue-like state. And then high school came along and I got a lot better. I got a better medication, a better dosage. And I got, I matured more intellectually. Like I caught up. I was developmentally behind with this stuff. And the more I caught up, the more I started hating school. I played hooky as much as I could, um, which was not that much. They really cracked down. I almost didn't graduate because of that. I asked, but I continuously asked questions in school, and I was asking in this math class, for example. This is the first time this was like really big to me, like a big deal in my educational history. I was asking the teacher, we're doing algebra and trig in this class, and it was the first time I was really seeing algebra, and it was awesome. I thought it was so cool, and I had a lot of ideas. Like I always had an idea how to do something faster, whatever, like how to shortcut it. I was trying to dig deep conceptually and figure out like, okay, can I do this here, and then because this is how this works, so you can do it faster here. You don't have to use this block approach to every problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask the teacher questions. I'd raise my hand. I sat in the back. I'd raise my hand, and at one point he's just like, you know what, Steven, stop asking questions. You're confusing people. And I was really taken aback at the time. I was like, what? First of all, as I understand it, so the analogy I'll use here is like when you're building, and Sal Khan uses kind of a similar analogy, I think. When you're learning stuff and building knowledge, it's kind of like building a wall, right? You build the base, and you need a solid base to continue building higher, right? And at that point, I realized everyone in school, or not everyone, that's obviously way too strong, but a lot of people, I'd say easily a majority in my class, I can say that comfortably because I know what they do. They were building Jenga towers, and they were just they weren't building a very solid foundation at all. And so my question would knock their. Apparently, I'm confusing people because their whole conception of the subject is getting thrown off by an innocuous question, right? Like that's so stupid. I was like, that makes no sense. Like, what are you talking about?
It means people aren't teaching things
Yeah.
appropriately, and people haven't learned
Oh
to
yeah.
learn appropriately.
And I was lucky enough to have a strong intuition and to figure out how things worked on my own. And I didn't pay attention to the books. I didn't pay attention to whatever. I got problems, and I tried to like first and foremost, I would get a problem and try to solve it. So like partial fractions, for example, I was like, how would this work? And for many concepts, you could just figure it out right on the spot. You're like, okay, so this is how it should work, because most of them, it's not usually there's not huge intuitive leaps. It's a logical system, especially in math. It's like, so the next step can be sort of, okay, I think this is how it will work, and then you do it. So I got a lot of practice with that. And yeah, so that teacher, I was pissed. I was 15. I was quite immature. And I just started, when he'd write problems on the board, I would just shout out the answer. This is just being an asshole, right? And it's my fault, but in a way it was precipitated by how I was treated in school. He'd write new problems on the board to show the class, and I just shout the answer out. I just shout it out instantly, and I'd have my hood over on my head, and then like Kenny from South Park, I had it like tied, so it's only my nose and mouth coming out, and so so I just look like this buffoon, and I'm acting out, and then I'd say, "Giddy up, let's go. We know the answer to this one. Let's keep going." Like just being an ass, and yeah, so that obviously did not help. Like teachers don't like that. But I was just frustrated, extremely, and I didn't really have anywhere to put my energy. And to me, if I was having fun and it was funny to me to act like an idiot and just basically be a dick, like obviously just it was not working. Like it was the relationship with the teacher wasn't working, and my relationship with the curriculum wasn't working. And this continued in English and in AP English and senior year. So it kept getting worse. This is the thing, is it did keep getting worse as I became more and more cognizant, and I became more and less Stephen Land, more like, okay, we're in the real world now. It just like I realized like, holy shit, like this is just garbage. Like this is so awful. No one's learning anything. No one understands. And standardized tests would prove that. I would just, I'd max out standardized tests years before most people took them. And because I understood things, and I was like, wait, why are people calling these tests hard? Because I really, like, for example, the ACT or like the SAT, everyone talked about how difficult it was and et cetera, and all of these things. And it was just a rudimentary application of stuff we should know, right? And it was just, if you think about things conceptually, they're not trying to trick you. These problems aren't like Putnam problems. It's not on a math Olympiad. It's generally just thinking a little bit. And school did not equip people to do well with those sorts of things.
Of course, school never equips people to do well, and it is the gifted that are the most, or especially the highly gifted, and more that are more poorly served, or at least visibly so.
Right.
But everybody is dealt a horrible hand when they're made to go to this particular kind of education, which is more schooling or homogenization. Which brings us back to the actual to the question that Charles answers, which is, why has there been a breakdown of education and critical thinking in the U.S.? I don't know. Do you have this one pulled up, Stephen?
Yep. So it says, we have an education system functioning precisely as intended, which precludes imparting critical thinking skills. When Napoleon routed the Prussians, widely considered, I can't pronounce that, arbiter of Nazism. So, like, whatever. I'm assuming basically it's
Johann Gottlieb Fichte. So we'll just say Mr. Fichte or Johann Fichte.
Yes. So he's a precursor to Nazism, I'm assuming. Decided the problem was that the non-aristocratic classes were too independent of the state. Some, after all, had simply walked away from the battle and returned to their farms or shops. He determined to overhaul this,
Volksschule, literally, or translated.
Yeah, Volksschule, using this system of thinking. If you want to influence them at all, you must do more than merely talk to him. You must fashion him in such a way that he simply cannot will any way other than what you wish him to will. This was in order to create an educational system that would produce workers who will not strike, citizens who will not revolt, soldiers who will not disobey others. The methods Fichte, or what, I don't know how to pronounce things. Okay, conceived to achieve such a breaking of human spirit and independence from the state, these were his innovations. So grades. To show that your work is not your own and is to be performed for only subjective approval and not for only tangible reward. Bells. To mark class periods to enforce the sense that your time is not your own. Homework. To show that your private time may be imposed on by the state. Rows and columns of desks. To instill a sense of isolation within regimentation. A campus lacking in privacy. With no place on the school grounds to escape scrutiny, a sense of personal privacy cannot form. Most importantly, a high-sounding curriculum that avoids teaching any processes start to finish, but requires instead the memorization of disjointed fact. Yeah, this is the most important for sure.
Sound the cancer alarm. Cancer. Okay. I'm done.
So that commercially useful skills that would impart independence are not acquired. Yes, the last one stands as particularly pernicious as process involves hands and brain working together, a mode of education that leads to lifelong learning or practical know-how, the kind of education that makes one independent. The crowning absurdity here is that this method of education purports to teach its students how to function in the real world while hermetically sealing them off from it. There is no input to nor from the real world. Furthermore, failure is to be avoided at all costs. Where do we get critical thinking skills? From trial and error in attempting to make things happen in the real world. And so when Horace Mann brought Fichte's Volksschule model back to his state of Massachusetts, where he was Secretary of Education, he was importing a scheme intended not to foster but to deny critical thinking, to deny practical knowledge, to deny self-actualization and key interpersonal skills. This was a system very much geared to producing good little Germans, that is, willing loyalists of the state. John Dewey later added some Tayloristic assembly line features to streamline the process, and voila, our public school system unchanged in any important respect for 2 full centuries. That's ridiculous. I mean, if you think about it, 2 fucking centuries. Very simply, if you want your children to develop independence of mind and the ability to thrive with their own insights and abilities, do not put them in public school or in those private schools that are only our public schools on steroids. Yes. Do not rely solely on homeschooling. Put them in the real world. Finding them apprenticeships and mentorships will give them an unfair advantage over those who spend years butts parked in the desk. Yeah, basically. And for example, my teacher. So I live in a very like smart area of like my town is really small and has many like it has a STEM school with 9,000 students, a regional medical center, and a hospital, and it's only 20,000 people in the whole town. So like basically, it's really the braininess per capita is like the 19th in America, according to like Forbes or something at one point. So there is no lack of talent streaming through our system, essentially our school system, and I actually have more to say about this, more interesting. So you'd think, in fact, though the smartest students in our school were often, and my teacher said this, he said, the problem with geniuses is they never learn how to work and they're lazy and they're all this stuff, like all these characters, like people who are smart, like the word genius cannot be applied to basically fucking anyone who was going through a school. Nope. Like that's the wrong word to use, but smart people, he saw problems like with them. He's like, oh, they're lazy. It's like, well, you'd think you'd want to take advantage of smart people as a resource, and you'd want to basically maximize their potential because they have a lot of it, right? So you'd think you'd have an educational system that adapts to suit their needs. And we have in here. So obviously I'm close to a STEM school, right? And so a lot of professors' kids, which I'm one, we early in, so like when we're like 15 or so, we'll take the the college placement test for math, right? So, and we'll be compared to the incoming freshman in a percentile, and then we'll go take calculus early or something. And a lot of kids finish Calc 3 and like DiffyQ and stuff basically before high school just by testing out here. So it's a good opportunity, but I'll tell you, it was still shit. It was still garbage at the college level. So I was 15, same time I had my ACT and stuff, and I got like a 99th percentile on both the trig and algebra placement tests above the S&T students. And I was like, okay, cool, this is going to be fun. I'm going to be learning a lot more math. I'm finally going to be in a place. And it was worse. It was actually worse. At this college level, it was still the same tedium, except there was no interaction with the class. Like we were just sitting there, and then we had this bullshit online homework, and there was no discussion of ideas, and it was just awful. And I got a C, right? I had like a B test average because I would read the textbook the night before, and I couldn't be bothered to do homework because I was like, well, it's 6% of your grade, so I just didn't do it. And I completely fell through because what I was expecting from college was I thought it would be a lot better than high school, but I found it to actually be worse. It was worse. In high school, there was at least more student-teacher interaction going on, regardless of how shitty that interaction is. It was there at least, and it was just not happening in this college setting. So I was really, and of course, I had to pay. My parents had to pay out their ass, and it was like way overpriced. Like me going to school for one semester now with scholarships and stuff is cheaper than me taking that one class, and they wouldn't let me apply for scholarships because I'm not a full-time student, and we get this stupid discount that's like you get basically the book for free while both my parents work at the university, so it's like that's just stupid, and the whole thing sucked. So I came back to school, and so guess what? So I came back to school after basically getting a C in Calc, and I was like, God, I understood the concepts, I just hadn't fleshed everything out. I didn't get the details. So because I was just lazy and I didn't ever solve practice problems, I just did it all on the test. And so I was like, I went to the math head of the department. I was always quite assertive. I was able to skip levels in certain classes by just talking to teachers. Like, hey, can I go up a level in this? This is boring. Can I do this? So I was able to like skip ahead in a few classes in school just because I was like, hey, can I? And teachers were pretty nicely. Some teachers, this is a dichotomy here, were quite receptive and very happy that students wanted to progress their education. Others were like pissed. And so, for example, I had already taken calculus at S&T, and I wanted to go into AP calculus because I just wanted to solidify the knowledge because I understood it. I just wanted to get more practice, essentially. What I should have done is just gone and taught it on my own and shut up.
MIT OpenCourseware, Khan Academy.
Yeah, exactly. But I wasn't.
Or find someone else to teach. Yeah, but now you know.
Right, now I know.
Now you just forget asking them, but you went asked and.
Yeah, so I went and asked. So I had this conversation, with the guidance counselor and the head of the math department, who taught college algebra and trig and math analysis. So I was like, okay, these people will listen. If I show them that I can do math, they'll want me to go into they'll let me go into AP calculus. Like, I can do it. That's fine. Like that. And so I talked to them, and I'm like, yeah, well, you know. And then they say this. They're like, well, you could, but you don't have math analysis, which is essentially was algebra 2. That's what that was. And I'm like, what's math analysis? I was like, I've heard of real analysis, and I know I haven't done that, but I don't know what
math analysis ain't real analysis. Holy
yeah,
crap,
I was like,
bad.
I don't know what that is. And I was like, I don't think
cancer.
And I was like, I don't think the other kids are doing real analysis, so let's see what they mean. And so I was like, and I told her, like, I really wanted to go into another class. Like, I was able and ready, and so I talked about my ACT. I'd already taken the ACT, has Algebra 2 content on it. I missed like one question in the math section because I forgot how to multiply matrices, and so I taught all this. I had already, I had A's in all my other math classes and all this stuff, and I was like, okay, she's just gonna be willing. And like, she's like, oh, I don't like kids skipping out. That's what she said. I don't like that. She's like, I like to keep people, like, they'll miss things. She thought we'll miss things, essentially.
I'm going to interject one little thing. I'm just going to be repeating something that you already said.
Yeah, go ahead.
A high-sounding curriculum that avoids teaching any processes start to finish, but requires instead the memorization of disjointed facts, so that commercially useful skills that would impart independence are not acquired. Your teacher was doing exactly what Fichte would have expected teachers to do, being put into that role. On one hand, on one hand, is completely blameworthy, but on the other hand, it really shouldn't surprise you or anyone.
No. I was frustrated at the time, but I wasn't as surprised as I wasn't that surprised. But I continued talking. Like, this was a 30-minute conversation. Like, this shouldn't have taken that long. But I wanted, like, I'm an obstinate person.
Mm-hmm.
I hold my ground.
Good.
My parents always said I had ODD, which is funny. Because, so, like, for example, when I was 2, I asked my mom a question, and she said no. And I said, Mom, no is not the answer. And she said she just knew like that I was just going to be like a hard time.
As a parent, that's like
it's a big signal, like, this kid's going to be. I'm not the most compliant person, so I'll admit to that.
Well, not being compliant, I am perfectly fine with not being compliant, but I do insist, on respect. But
yes, exactly. And unfortunately,
but go ahead, ask me if I'm teaching you. If I'm teaching anybody anything, if you can come and ask me, okay, what's the whole point of this, and I can't answer you, then I'm not going to force you to learn it.
Right, and I did lose. Like, I respected my teachers, right, until they proved, like, I was like, they're not worthy of it. And then I acted out, and then I said, giddy up when he put a math problem on the board. Like, let's go.
Let's do this.
And, like,
it doesn't.
And so the teachers really hated that. They don't like being patronized by a 15-year-old. But anyway, so I keep talking with this lady, and like, she's like just not budging. I was like, well, what concepts do I miss in math analysis? And she's like, okay, well, she listed about 12 concepts, and there was one that I had not heard of it was banal, like, it was really easy. And And she was like, I was like, I don't know one of those. Can I teach myself right now and then just test out? And she's like, you sound so arrogant. And I was like, what? Like, I'm just saying what I'm not.
You know
I'm
what
not.
you know, and you know what you don't know. You knew that you
Yeah, and I
didn't know
know what
one
I can do.
concept, and you knew that you could go and do this thing called a read, and
Read
learn.
and learn about it. Right, exactly. I was like, please, just let me test out. And she's like, no, I don't like testing out. Like, you have to do this. So I was like, okay. So I signed up for college algebra and trig math analysis, and I proceeded to teach her more than she taught me. And multiple times in the class, I would answer a question and she'd just gawk and then what's going on in your head, and then try to explain your thoughts and all this stuff. And it was just, and then she would say, oh, so you did guess and check. I was like, no, I don't guess
Guess
and
and
check. That's
check.
not
No. But that's the best that a lot of people can do when it comes to,
right.
and it has to
She
do
puts
predominantly with not having a cohesive understanding of things, but having
right,
uh, a piecemeal, completely disjointed knowledge, which is interestingly that final point. The memorization of
right.
disjointed facts, so that commercially
Yes,
useful skills,
exactly.
or intellectually useful skills for that matter, that would
And
impart independence or freedom of
and
thought, the ability to think within a
right,
realm and be creative and pull different elements together, is not acquired, and in fact is
right. And
discouraged.
and and she eventually, like, it took towards the end of the year where she would, like, in college algebra class, she's like, I don't understand this, but maybe someone smarter than me could explain it. She, like, eventually came, like, started trying to use me as, like, a resource, and I didn't want to be, like, I did not have any respect. I hated what I was doing. I hated where I was. I didn't want to comply with that. And like, she, like, for example, like, the concept of combinations in math. She's been teaching it for 25 years. She fundamentally didn't understand it, like, quite obviously, because there'd be a problem where you just do seven choose two, combination two, like, very obviously. She's like, I don't know how to do this, so she just brute forced it. And I was like, what? You're the head of the math department. You've been doing this for 25 years, and, like, how do I know more than you? I don't even, like, really know these concepts. I barely looked at them. And it was not because, like, oh, I'm some sort of higher being that somehow just knows. Like, no, like, she just didn't critically think. She did the piecemeal memorization and just didn't think about it. Like, if you just think about this stuff and dig deeper and try to understand and connect to things, like, and so many kids are so averse to math because it doesn't present itself as readily to that as, say, biology or psychology, or just many other subjects where you can just kind of digest it through memory. Like, no.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I hated that class, and then I went into AP Calc finally, and my teacher despised me, absolutely despised me. He was, because, I mean, at that point I was so disenfranchised with school. I hated it. I was literally going hide his class, like, most of the time, and then like, then just talking about memes in the back with my friends, but I'd still do well on the tests and stuff, and he was just hated that, and
B bright.
he ran
But
the anime club, interestingly enough, and I never mind. I'm not going to go into him. He was kind of a tool, but but, like,
well, tools are
yeah.
good. You accomplish things with them,
Well,
right?
yeah, he was more like a broken tool. You don't accomplish anything with this guy.
Oh, I'm
And yeah,
sorry.
and then I was in English and I had a D minus, but I would do well on the AP, like, practice test that they give, and my teacher was like, what's going on? Because every time I would interact in the class, I was met with just, like, obviously there was just no discussion going on. People weren't really reading into the text. They were instead trying to, like, oh, what's, like, I don't know. I don't know. To summarize, it was shit. It was, like, I hated it, and I almost dropped out, and I was in detention a lot in Saturday school, and the administration didn't look fondly in me. I didn't look fondly back. And then once I left, I didn't pick up my diploma. Didn't go to graduation. I was voted the worst case of senioritis for my superlative, and I wasn't there to pick it up. So, so suffice to say, school was, like, I hated it, and I felt like I wasted a ton of time, and it didn't. It hit me finally, and I'm in college now, and it's the same shit again, really. Just in a more prestigious. It's presented to you in a more it's the guise of prestige, right? Like you have these professors, and you have this beautiful campus, and all this pontificating about higher ed, and how we're the liberal general education, great well-roundedness, blah blah blah. You should be a math major and art history minor. Like that's a good idea. Like, fuck, dude, just learn what you want to learn. And then I finally switched. I started in chemistry and pre-med, and I realized pre-med was garbage because you had to just do all this extra shit that didn't, to me, feel related at all to being a doctor. And like all this just extra shit, like jumping through all these stupid hoops, right? And I have an idea to get to after I talk about this regarding that stuff. And then I switched to math, and I realized they present it in the most dry manner, and they just kind of digest it, right? Like, oh, here's the thing, just do it, right? Like not much thinking. I'll say this, I had an amazing advisor. I was really I was hating school at first. And I saw my friends doing Calc 2. I told you guys about how I only did Calc 1 in high school, and I was basically just stopped there. Even though I started way earlier, I didn't continue. And then I was like, okay, let me just learn. Let me look at. There's this great place. I'll put it. I'll just put it in chat. I suggest this to anyone. So it's called Paul's Online Math Notes. And okay, I'm putting in chat right now.
If it's Paul's a link, it's probably not going to let you do it.
Oh, it won't. Can I somehow edit it? I'll
send it to me on WhatsApp, and I'll copy it and put it into the video description so it doesn't even get lost in the chat.
All right, cool. So
I'll put Paul's Online Math Notes right underneath Charles' tips answers to what?
Is it possible that I send it to you on Discord, or can you look at it?
You can send it to me on Discord, and after our intermission, I'll put it up.
Okay, cool. I'll send it to you then.
Yeah, and then we can go and just remind them to look at Paul's Online Math Notes at that point.
Okay. Cool.
So anyhow, you said that you had you said you had another point that you were going to make after continuing the point that you're currently making.
Yeah. So essentially, I saw my friends doing Calc 2, and I was kind of feeling dissonant, right? I was like, wow, I'm just wasting my time. I didn't actually learn anything, and I'm just sitting there doing nothing. So I spent basically I just hyper focused like hell for a weekend and devoured Calc 2. And then within one day I was helping them with their homework, and I was like, okay, this is really cool. I really like this. Like, wow. And then the next day I had finished the course, and then the Monday I went and I tested out, and I was like, wow, I could have done this the whole time. What the fuck was I doing in school? Like, what was I didn't even know I could learn this fast on my own. I didn't know this was an opportunity. And then school got. It's funny enough is the more things I learned that, oh, this is cool, then I'm like, wow, school sucks more. It sucks more and more. And
yeah, school does kind of suck the life out of you.
And I had a great advisor who let me go into math courses that I didn't have. He recognized that I could do this stuff, and he's like, okay, so I'll put you in this higher math. And I did really well in the first test, like 100%, and high 90s, and then I was like, wow, it's the same shit again, just at a different level. It doesn't matter how high up the ladder you go, it's the same shit. And so yeah, I got really disenfranchised again, drop math. I was like, okay. And so I switched to finance and economics, basically because I was like, well, this is practical shit. It's not super economics is more theoretical, but finance in itself is kind of like learning, and I feel like I'm just learning things to learn it. Kind of like a trade, right? Like when you go to trade school, you don't complain about how slow you're learning how to weld. You just do shit, right? So I felt like, okay, I feel like, I don't know yet, so the judgment is not, the verdict is not quite out. I feel like it should be better. But my point was, with the pre-med stuff, was this kind of holistic thing. Like, first of all, that's so arbitrary. Like, calling someone well-rounded because they jumped through these random hoops, literally random hoops, I'm going to say that, does not make them
but evenly dispersed.
Right, but evenly, yeah, exactly.
But evenly dispersed, but just throw a bunch of random content in it and say, oh, you need to know this.
I don't necessarily care, how many volunteering hours my doctor did, and I want to know how well he did on the MCAT. I want to know how well they understand what the fuck they're doing.
How well did he do on the boards, and what is
Yeah,
the chance I'm going to get through the surgery and survive?
exactly. Like I
Not
don't
does this
care.
guy know how to kiss someone's butt?
I don't care if they went overseas to do one of those, you know, volunteering abroad things and all this fucking kiss ass shit. And luckily I was in a pre-med freshman interest group, and we had like a class, like a pass fail class. And I was like, holy shit. The more and more it happened, like I was in it, I was like, this is not for me. And I really wanted to be a psychiatrist for the reasons I talked about. In high school, I watched people. I was quite good at figuring, like diagnosing, and I really liked that. I liked psychology and I liked sciences, so I felt like it was a good fusion of the two. And I was like, this is just, I can't, there's no way I'm going to be able to sit through all this without like exploding. So I'm
Stephen,
just skipping around, right?
how do you think that you would have done if you would have had an internship? If you would have just literally started as a doctor's apprentice instead.
I think I would have learned much faster than I would have in the classroom, for sure. And I would have been able to come to the information on my own without it being, because when you're in the situation, as say next to a doctor, it becomes clear. You get kind of a sense of the weight of everything. Okay, this is this important because he's doing this a lot and this sort of thing, and these things are a little bit okay. This is less. So you sort of build your hierarchy or your conceptual web of what's going on, and you connect things very quickly, and you go about knowledge very quickly. Like giving someone a problem and then asking them to solve it, I think is better than just, okay, this is how you solve these problems and this is how you solve these problems. Like, no, like let them, a lot of the things don't need to be explicit. They can be implicitly figured out through the process, and things can become clear that way. But that's just the opposite of, and that's how I got by in econ, and because I never took, like I wasn't there in class. I was in Stephen Land. I was on my phone looking at memes again or something like that, just being very ADD. And then so I wouldn't, and then my friends would do the homework for me. They would be a group chat, just copy. You don't have to do it. That's pretty. And then so I didn't really, but by simply certain questions in economics became, instead of thinking back, okay, what were we told to do? I thought, how would I solve this? Like literally, it's just that line of thought. So I would throw myself in the town as these things change, and I'd think about, okay, so if I'm a person in this town, and I considered like the multiple choice options of like, would this make sense? And I'd look around, I'm like, okay, that wouldn't make sense. This option doesn't make sense. People wouldn't do that. And by just modeling things and then thinking about them, I was able to get like an A on most of my economics tests.
Well, econ makes sense. Econ is all about choices, which is interesting because econ, in terms of choice, econ is all about things free people do.
Exactly.
That is the definition. If you think about freedom as choice, econ is a study of freedom. It's a really, really cool,
really awesome
subject.
And then I'd missed the questions that had like, oh, what person came up with this theory? What would this like? Fuck if I know, I don't know, but I would see how things work.
You know the theory,
right? And I found the kids who pay attention to notes in class and they're doing all this stuff. I seemed to understand it way better than they did, even though I wasn't doing shit. Just because I tried to think.
You were trying to understand things on a conceptual first principle level.
Right, exactly. And they don't do first principles. They just, okay, this is your technique, this is this technique. And then kids who I knew were smart were getting confused because they were thinking about how to solve, like what were we told to do? And then just
apply this one disjointed element that we memorized from this one lecture and put it to this exact problem, as opposed to thinking about things as in a holistic sense. Which is interesting that people would do that in an economics class, but they do. What are some ways of improving the educational system without investing financially in it?
Well, I mean, you could even
here we have the other answer there, but if you want to, or not the answer, but Charles Tipp's answer out there.
Well, I mean, I think you can spend a lot less money on how education as it currently is. You don't need that much to teach someone something. You can literally like a board and a marker and an understanding of the concepts, and that's good. Like, fuck, you could teach someone like, oh, let's think of volume. Oh, this is like, you can just pick up random shit and figure out how that ties into something else.
Yeah, you can use a protein bar to teach a kid how to read.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you don't need like our schools like iPads and shit. We have all this stupid stuff. Stupid expensive educational programs that are like tedious first of all and just shit. And like so much money is being sunk into like, maybe you need a computer lab, maybe for like programming stuff, but maybe not. You don't necessarily. You could theoretically.
Don't need it. Certainly, iPads would not be good. I mean,
yeah, iPads is like our school. Everyone got like not everyone got iPads, but we had iPod carts that would go around the classrooms. So like, oh, this teacher needs the iPad for this today, and like
that's complete and total horse crap. Nobody needs an iPad in a classroom.
Huge waste of money. Yeah, you don't need a fucking iPad for anything. And yeah, no, you could like I think. My idea right now, this is just off the top, who knows if this is right. I want to see, instead of how to solve it first, I want to see the problem first. Because...
Well, here we have Mr. Tipp's answer.
Okay, yeah, let's go right into it.
Like he does a pretty decent job of pinpointing at least part of the problem. And he agrees with you that the best way to improve education in the United States would actually be to end all funding of it. I say that for two reasons. One, John Taylor Gatto said it to me. I refused to credit it at first, but I had volunteered to chauffeur him around a lecture tour of the San Francisco Bay Area, which gave me several long rides to discuss it and different of his lectures to listen to. I came to see his claim as accurate. 2. My mentor, Al Shapiro, explained Shapiro's law to me as, no system is so badly designed that people will not keep upping the inputs to it, hoping to make it work.
Oh, yeah.
Sounds optimistic, but what he meant is that everyone keeps on wasting money and effort rather than step back and realize, hey, we're going about this all wrong.
This graph is insane, by the way.
Here's how wrong.
Absolutely.
Trends in inflation, adjusted cost of a complete K-12 public education, and achievement of 17-year-olds. So
look at this graph.
You can see throwing money. Shit. You can totally see that throwing money at the situation helps. You wind up having money thrown at the situation, a decrease in science scores, generally math scores staying about the same, reading scores staying about the same.
Yeah, literally just.
And the total cost skyrocketing to over 3 times what it was. Inflation adjusted.
Adjusted, yeah.
Inflation adjusted.
Yeah,
this is horrible. In the state of New York, students can't find pens and pencils necessarily in their classrooms, but still, for some reason, the cost per head per student is, I think, just slightly over $20,000. I mean, could you just think about what you could do if somebody just handed you $20,000 and said, educate this kid for a year? Like, literally, give one teacher
$20,000 in the bank and ignore it.
Give one teacher 8 students, and that teacher would have $160,000 for educating somebody. So let's say you rent out facilities. That might cost you, what, $8,000 a year? Okay, so we're down to $152,000. Then we get some books. Oh boy, let's just go and say that we go all the way down to $140,000 after we get books and supplies. That teacher is going to walk away with $140,000, and then ultimately be able to use that money to arrange things that to be fun for everyone. They could go places and do things and ship the kids off to internships and residencies and apprenticeships.
Invest the money and just scrap it all. Like, really.
Yeah.
Or use a tiny bit of it and then invest the rest. Like, ugh.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But the whole idea of having a bureaucratic system designed to ensure everyone gets a proper education means that most of the money gets flushed down the toilet and it doesn't get used properly due to the fact that people actually think that central planning helps. What is wrong with
Yeah.
our public education? It presumes to teach our children to excel in the real world while hermetically sealing them from it. It presumes to make them fully realized American citizens while denying them almost any practice in the rights and freedoms that make us exceptional. It presumes to confer intellectual ability, but without critical thinking and without the hands and head together teaching a process that stays with a student for life. In short, the case can be made that students exit less equipped to succeed in life than if they had not attended at all. And that doesn't mean living in a vacuum for 12 years. That means living in life for 12 years without
Hmm.
any guidance. It's like throw in a
Yeah.
little appropriate guidance,
Basically
throw in a little internships, throw mentorships, throw apprenticeships, throw, caring parents and communities and grandparents and anybody that wants
Hmm.
to have a hand in the life of a child. I guarantee you, I, I am not being unrealistic or arrogant here. I Give me half of the budget of New York per child, and I will ensure that up to 8 students per teacher, so 6 to 8 students per teacher, will get a far, far, far superior education to anything offered in any public school anywhere in the world, and almost any, if not any, private school, and it will be easy.
Yeah. No.
And so,
A good example for this, like think of Ramanujan. Okay, obviously we're comparing it to one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century. I guess was when he was alive. I don't know. Maybe before then. Maybe it's the 19th. Whatever. Yeah, maybe it was the 19th century. I don't know. I don't remember. Regardless, he lived in fucking like just a small village in India. Had barely rudimentary math. He had a math book. He got a math book, and he just studied it. He spent a lot of time just doing it, right? Fuck the teaching didn't matter to him. The teachers, regardless. He came up, this guy in poverty in India with no resources, came up with theorems and stuff that is still being proved today. Like this, and yeah, he's brilliant, right? That's obviously not every student's going to be doing that, but like.
but the fact
Did he
is,
succeed because he had an educational system that was like no?
okay,
He just is self-educated.
but I taught somebody who was in the upper single digits with a stick on a baseball diamond basics of linear ordinary differential equations. Just because he asked a question. Spent an afternoon, went over the fundamentals, and he understood it.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you going to do that a little knowledge, a stick, and a place to write isn't enough?
Right. Exactly. And yeah, and literally like English and grammar rules and all that stuff. Just read a bunch, figure out the basics behind each punctuation, what punctuation means, be able to write legibly and clearly. Reading a lot helps you absorb and figure out like how people convey ideas and what's normal. That's all. A teacher doesn't have to do shit. They just give a kid a book, right? Give kids books, have books available for those kids. And let's see, for math, you literally introduce concepts and like just give them, like lead them through a little bit. Maybe you don't push it, shove it down their throat. You let them come and eat it on their own volition. And then it gets internalized.
Indeed.
The science as well. Most of this stuff is. It's not like some huge, like not everything is like a Putnam problem. I know I used that already, but yeah, and then people don't give kids enough time to like maybe struggle and work with the concepts and maybe withhold their basically put off their disbelief, right? And kind of get and I struggled with this as a kid since I had never. My dad would give me problems that were way above my level, and I couldn't really solve them at first. I just couldn't, right? I just didn't. I didn't know how, and I would just stop. I was so used to in school just having it fed to me, and my dad this might, I don't know if this is good, but I don't know, I don't have any qualms with it, but he said, you can't leave this chair until you figure this out. And like, so I was just crying and not doing anything, right? Just sitting there, and he's like, no, you can't move until you. So I sat there for hours,
And then it was an attitude thing.
Yeah, it was completely attitude thing. And then once I actually looked at the problem, I solved it within like minutes. Like I was like, oh, okay. But instead, I just whined and acted helpless, and
that's what school teaches. School conditions you to do that. And so Gatto's advice and Shapiro's injunction makes sense to me. Shut our public schools down today. We'll be better off tomorrow, is what Gatto said to me. After all, the best of the teaching corps would immediately start setting up their own schools in the private and civil sectors. Innovation never happens in the public sector. We could have whole new approaches in the private and civil sectors. Businesses could open their doors for internships and apprenticeships. Young people could get together on their own and pursue their interest, maybe even hire a mentor. That was our little red schoolhouse model that worked so well for a century plus. Which, interestingly, 5th grade students during the red schoolhouse era, I believe it was 4 out of 1,000 were not literate. And not literate meant not being essentially at a graduate school level of English today.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay, so the model worked, believe me. In fact, I went and I found a bunch of the old readers. I love it. It's like someone scanned them and threw a whole bunch of them on Gutenberg.org and other places like that. So now I'm going and printing out all these old readers for my kids. So my awesome. my kids are gonna get, oh man, they're gonna get the cool stuff that I didn't even get.
Awesome, great.
And then Mr. Tipskin finishes his answer by saying, speaking of innovation, I've seen business plans for schools that would actually hire their students and impart solid career skills across a variety of fields. So much for not being able to afford private school. And we can comment on this if you have anything else, but then after this we'll have our 5-minute intermission and then reconvene to talk about economics.
Well, and we should definitely do with schooling, like the appropriate developmental, like not everyone in lockstep. I know we say that probably every single stream, but like that's a big deal because the kids at the bottom feel frustrated and it's too fast for them. They don't end up really learning much, and then they just get hurried along to learn more things less and less, and they don't have this.
Which is not learn; it's literally just get disjointed crap crammed down your
right. Yeah, you have just some shit to like hold in their head in a confusing way that doesn't make sense, so they just don't internalize shit. And then the kids who are basically ahead fucking get the worst habits. They develop the worst habits, the worst mindsets. And then when they hit like real life, they just flop on their faces. And no matter how gifted they are, it happens. And I mean, some of the smartest people I knew in high school, like one of them dropped out. The other struggled a lot in college, had to come back for a little bit. And no one is served well. Like the average is, they subsist, right? That's basically what the extent of it. They don't excel. They aren't really maximizing their abilities either. So yeah, it's just bad for everyone. And that's how I'm pretty sure that's how they did in the past, because they had a limited number of teachers. So they couldn't just so they would just, okay, we'll put you in the higher grade, right? Because this kid we'll just put him up, and then we'll keep, we'll keep the kids in the lower grade.
Or you have a dozen kids and their parents, the parents basically being the school board, going and hiring the teacher for the one-room schoolhouse.
Yeah, exactly.
Which literally means there is no grade level. You just kind of go through the readers at your own pace, and you're done. Well, I guess you're done, but you're educated. Now go out into the world and do stuff.
Right.
And then even so, school was oftentimes suspended for harvest, or suspended for big projects, or suspended if the town had to go and get a whole bunch of people together to do something. I mean, people didn't prioritize going to the facilities.
Mm-hmm.
People prioritized functional, relevant knowledge. And if
Knowledge.
people prioritize that today, well, guess what? The educational systems that form around it, if the free market is allowed to take
Yes.
is allowed to take hold of the situation, will provide for everybody the appropriate
It, it's a
educational
great. It's a
paradigm
great.
for them.
It's a great tangent to economics, the free market versus central planning,
All right.
and we know how
So
much that
we'll
works
leave you
too.
with that tantalizing little bit. I am going to clear a whole lot of this other stuff that we've been having. And then we will begin our intermission and see you in, let's say, about 5 minutes.
Yep.
Starting as soon as I can find how to do the countdown timer. Starting Okay, now we have noise. Good.
Awesome.
So people will be able to hear what we say. We are on to our thing about economics. Mr. Stutts reminded me. Unfortunately, I was too slow. I was too slow. I didn't get Paul's online math notes for you, but even if you Google them, you can find them. And I will make sure that after the stream is over, we'll get all of the timestamps and everything like that put into the description, like all the different times that we do, all the different aspects of the stream, so that you can search at your leisure or refer your friends to particular timestamps. Right now, we're going to take a look at the book, which you'll find in the description. Let me open. I have to find the book myself. There, open up the link. Economics and Free Markets, and we will be beginning on page 13.
Cool.
The subjective value and gains from trade. So, just to give a little bit of a background on what it is that we're going to be talking about. We're talking about value, gain, and the unlimited possibilities for wealth creation. So this is as much a question of attitude as it is of other things. For example, well, first we'll start with the outline. Value is subjective. Voluntary trade creates wealth, and it makes traders wealthier according to their own values. This is because value is subjective. We're talking about this in the outline on a completely abstract level, but I promise you we will get to the things on a more concrete level too. The manifestation thereof is called the principle of the invisible hand. That's what economists have called it. And because of the principle of the invisible hand, and because people have ingenuity, and because this thing called the brain exists, ultimately wealth is not fixed.
Ultimate resource.
People create it and can do so without limit. The ultimate resource is human ingenuity, is human spirit, is the human mind. It is innovation. It is the real driver behind the machinery of innovation. And money is not wealth. Money is the conveyor belt by which transactions take place. Wealth is producing things.
Yes.
So,
money is debt, as you said.
Money is debt.
Yes.
So, our first topic, value, is subjective. You can find this on page 13 of the book. Among the most important concepts in econ is that different people value things differently. Some people love seafood, others don't. Some enjoy watching football, others prefer old movies. Taste in music vary widely, and the same person values the same thing differently in different times and different situations. The value you put on a nice meal, for example, depends on how recently you last ate. So the economic term for that is that value is subjective. Value is in the eye of the beholder. This stands opposed to the older labor theory that the value of something is whatever labor is required to produce it. So for a bottle of water, it's finding water, filtering water, producing plastic, putting the water in the bottle, gluing on the label and screwing the bottle shut, that it cost $1 to do that. But ultimately, if no one's willing to pay that $1, well, then that bottle of water is not worth that $1. It has to do with how different people value different things. So let's say Mr. Stutts and I wanted to engage in trading. And of course, there's the bartering system. Like if I'm producing things, and of course you can go and say that everything I do has a monetary value because we do use this stuff that basically means that because I have this note, I can give this to people who are compelled to use this currency, and they will be compelled to give me €5 worth of goods and services. But to my understanding, Mr. Stutts, you have a hydroponic garden. Is that not the case?
Yeah, we do actually. We have these little barrels, and they're like cut up soap barrels, and they're all on our driveway, and it drives my mom crazy. But my dad, my dad wants to grow food, so yeah, we have an abundance of different types of vegetables and etc.
Okay, so right outside, my wife and I, but mostly my wife has we have our own little garden here.
Oh, cool.
So what all do you grow in your garden?
Well, we have peppers, we have kale, we have like jalapeno peppers. I think we might have some cayenne peppers. We have arugula, and various other, I think spinach, tomatoes. My dad loves tomatoes.
Mm.
I don't. Yeah, there's more, but I don't
Okay,
necessarily.
so your dad loves
But yeah.
tomatoes and you don't. So let's say
Oh
both
yeah.
you and your dad have a garden and you grow nothing but tomatoes, and your dad grows
I
nothing
like peppers.
but peppers and kale.
Cool.
So, how much do you personally value the tomatoes that you've grown?
Not at all.
Okay, so
Really
if
not.
your dad were to offer you 1 pepper for 1 tomato, you would take that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it'd be like a netting the value of a pepper, basically, to me.
Okay, so you would be giving up something that you see as worthless, that tomato, and
Yeah.
you would be getting back something that you see as worth something, namely the pepper.
Oh yeah. Right. Yeah.
So,
I'd like
would you
that.
say then that transaction would make both you and your dad richer, assuming both of you consented to it?
Yeah, I would say so.
Because value is subjective, and this
Yeah.
segues perfectly to our next point, that voluntary trade creates wealth because it makes the traders wealthier according to their own values. I don't need to value tomatoes. You don't need to value tomatoes. But if somebody else values tomatoes and I happen to grow them, then the fact that they value it means that if they have made, or someone else has made something that I value and they can somehow procure it for me, then they will get the tomatoes that they value.
Yeah.
Very, 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 very simple. So that is the idea that wealth can literally come from not even making anything new, but taking what already exists and finding ways of getting it into the hands of the people that want it. That's why stores make money. Stores don't make money by making anything new. Stores make money by getting people in the door, both who sell stuff. Ultimately, those people come at
Mhm.
night, and then they stock the shelves, and then the people who buy stuff who come in at day, and
Mhm.
and pay for the stuff, and then the store winds up getting to have the difference in between what was paid to the seller and uh, uh, or the difference in between what the buyer pays and what the seller takes. And it's actually worth it to the buyer and to the seller both to congregate at the store or at the marketplace or what have you. The fact that place in and of itself exists provides value to people. So
Yeah.
everyone gets what they want by engaging in one particular form of commerce that everyone has agreed to engage in.
It's almost magical, honestly. That's what I
Yeah,
keep thinking of when I hear about it.
and you can
Or when
hate
I think
tomatoes.
about it.
I mean, you can want to play baseball with tomatoes. You can not want any tomatoes, and you could also be the most crabby, most ill-mannered, horrible person on the face of the earth. But if you give me the tomatoes that I want, and I give you the pepper that you want, even though you might be a poop head and I might be an a-hole, we can enrich each other's lives. This is so amoral, not anti-moral, not immoral, but amoral, that
Yeah.
even the bad ones can do good and make value for other people.
Yes.
Voluntary trade, free market is amazing.
Awesome. Yeah. Super cool. All the implications too. Yeah, so David said, is that like what Alan Watts said? He said, money is like inches. It's representative of wealth, but isn't itself wealth. I said, that sounds decent, although I don't know what he means by inches, maybe in the standardized measurement.
Well, okay. What intrinsic value does this have? I could write on it, I can burn it, I can wipe my ass with
very
it.
little. Yeah,
This
very little.
this thing does not have intrinsic value.
No.
Okay, so
Like potential.
this
It's like if I might make this analogy, I don't know if it's correct, but I like to think of it as almost like potential energy, where stuff's not happening yet with it, but you can convert it to something else and become actual wealth or actual energy in that sense. But that could be wrong. That could be like a bad analogy. No, I don't know.
well, I'll give you the same example I gave on the parlor the other day. You can trade about on any given day 3 of these for 1 of these. Now, the monetary value of this is 1 ounce of 0.9999 pure silver, and you can see that in Canada, this is worth 5 Canadian dollars. I don't know if you can see it all that well, but this is worth 5 Canadian dollars.
I can agree. I can trust you on that.
Okay, so I can go to a store in Canada and pay for something worth 5 Canadian dollars. Now, which is interesting because the intrinsic value of the silver in this is more. I can get more for the silver than I can for the 5 Canadian dollars. I mean, heck, if I can get over 15 euros, or we'll just say 15 euros. If I can get 15 euros, and that would be like what? It'd be more than 15 Canadian dollars.
Mm-hmm.
It would be what?
Maybe
more than times 1.3.
I
I can't even think of the conversion rate off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it's over 1.3. So this in and of itself is more valuable, right? Because I can go and I can give this to some sort of a tech firm that does manufacturing. They can smelt this and use the silver as a conductor in their product.
Mm-hmm.
This is intrinsically more valuable than 3 of these, even though 3 of these could potentially pay for 1 of these.
Yes.
And that's the only reason that we use these is because the government can force us to pay taxes with them.
Yes.
Which means that, in a free market, we could decide to use this as a store of value, or as a measurement of how much one person is indebted to another, or how much society is indebted to a person for generating goods or services. We could decide to do this in a free market. We could decide to use this. We can decide to use whatever we want. But then, there winds up being all these impediments on the free market.
Right. And lots of, I'd say, conversion difficulties and stuff like that.
Well, yeah. But ultimately, if you have, where there's a will, there is a way.
Yeah, for sure.
Where there is a will, there is a way. And ultimately, the only thing this or this does is make making deals easier.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, like if you're trying to buy a house, it's going to be hard to trade. Like say you're trying to buy a huge thing with cash or credit or whatever. It's sort of expedient there.
But it's completely doable. I know people that traded all. For example, one person traded all the concrete work for the foundations of the house for coming over and refinishing the siding and putting a special waterproof, slip-proof, tacky sealant on someone's driveway and garage floor. They both thought they were they both thought they were getting the better end of the deal, right? The
Hmm.
person was like, well, I would be paying this much for concrete, but I would be myself, with my own business. I'm capable of going and redoing the siding and redoing the resealing and redoing all this other stuff for way less than what I would ultimately pay someone else to do. And then the
Yeah.
guy with the concrete company was like, "Well, I got all the stuff I need to do all the concrete work, and this isn't really valuable to me. But what this other guy's doing, given the fact that he already has that stuff, I would pay an awful lot more." So they
Oh
came
yeah.
up with that deal. I know people that have, people have traded for houses. People have traded for financial assets of all kind. It's really amazing, and it's mostly because it's a taboo thing that more people don't do it. It's not at all unhealthy or wrong.
Right.
And that invisible hand principle is the principle that even if someone's a complete and total snothead and is only in the market for himself, you can't get ahead in the market without doing something good for somebody else.
And that leads pretty well into what Jacob said in the chat.
Uh-huh.
So he says, I think that is the crux of my disagreement with Matt. I would say that if a bad person benefiting from the generation of wealth is not amoral, but immoral, since that person is bad.
Well, in
And
that
I'll
case,
just go ahead.
a bad person existing is immoral because they're benefiting from every breath that they take.
Yeah. And the thing is, other people are benefiting from the bad person regardless, so they are still generating.
Exactly.
Or like,
I mean,
yeah.
do you mind having a bad person be, slave labor for you or something?
My doctor could be the let's say I'm gonna choose carefully because I don't want to like offend people. If my doctor saves my life, he could be cussing me out the whole time. He could be shitting on my family, whatever. I wouldn't like that obviously, but hey, like I still got a value out of it, right? Like objectively, I got value. I can ignore the emotional, the baggage.
But if you have two doctors, one next to another, one who's a complete and total jerk, and another who's not, and both are charging the same, who's going to get the patients?
Exactly.
Assuming that they're both equally good.
The nice, yeah. And also but let's say the nice one's a complete numbnut. I don't care that he's nice. That doesn't really matter because the service I'm trying to get from him.
Yeah. If the service discrepancy is like this, and the niceness only makes it, ameliorates it that much.
Yeah, I would still choose the dick, and that's I like that value takes precedent to my feelings in that circumstance.
Yeah, in fact, psychopaths are amongst the best surgeons. But yeah. I'm interested in reading a little bit more here of what Jacob says. If a bad person benefiting from the generation of wealth is not amoral but immoral. So I'm wondering from what perspective that comment comes. I mean, is this thinking that somehow a bad, what should the lot in life of a bad person be, and what's the difference in between a bad person being in jail, living off welfare, or being in the economy? Well, ultimately, living off welfare, he's not doing anything for anybody else. So he's just being a drain on natural resources.
Yeah.
In jail, same general idea. He might also wind up becoming a carrier of STDs. Well, But then if he is in the economy, then at least in the most measurable sense that we can understand, he is generating value for other people.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, if there is rule of law still, and it's like, well, let's say someone is some sort of a nasty pervert or whatever, it's not like he'll be able to use his ill-gotten gains, to I don't know, let's think of something horrible that someone could do with their ill-gotten gains. Child trafficking. To buy sex slaves. Because if people go and find out that someone has sex slaves, well, first off, they're going to get quite likely thrown out of the marketplace, because no one's going to want to do business with them, because somebody else is going to fill that role. And secondly, people will go and throw the guy into jail.
And Jacob did reply. So he says, okay, in any complex situation, there are many variables that need to be weighed. However, a bad person getting a good result is an inherently bad result, and that should be weighed negatively. Then he said, it's not logical, it's a moral axiom. And my reply to that would be, yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the moral part only, I don't know. But I would say that he is creating value. So there is a net positive coming from him. So yeah, maybe him being a dick to people and creating sort of a social negative in that respect, it could get outweighed in my mind by him providing a service that many other people want and depend on or benefit from.
Exactly. I mean, if someone's a complete and total jerk and doesn't do anything for anybody, that person is more of a drain than if someone's a complete and total jerk and does do something.
Yes.
Right. So ultimately, if you're talking about moral axioms, then the logical conclusion is that no one vicious should be breathing. That is the logical conclusion of the statement that you have made. Take the argument to its inevitable conclusion. That's the inevitable conclusion. And especially if we go into a little bit of introspection and realize that none of us are perfect.
Then
ultimately, by what you're saying, we all should be dead.
I think there's some conflation with success as a coefficient of moral weight, kind of, if that makes sense. I think that they're separate entities pretty much entirely. So him being successful doesn't make him a worse threat, right? Because the bad person who's a hermit who's living under the bridge and not really affecting people, who's to say that the equally bad person who is a successful businessman is worse because he's successful and he's still succeeding despite the badness? I'd actually say maybe the successful businessman would actually add more value to because he is,
because
there's something he's doing that people are valuing.
Something virtuous along the way too.
That someone valued.
Because I'll admit, I'm a horrible person. I hold a lot of people in contempt. I am very contemptuous of 90% of everyone and everything. At least to some extent. And I'm contemptuous of myself in the same vein. Mm-hmm. There is so much contemptible about me. And that I find it very difficult to even love myself.
And then
let alone anybody else.
And there's the other root problem of what is bad, and that's another, I know it's the ultimate trope of philosophy, and it always devolves into semantics, right? But it's really hard to objectively okay, this is bad, this is good. Yeah, you can probably say, but it's not a precise thing, right? It's more, it feels predicated on feelings.
It is combination predicated on feelings for the most part. Unless you have some sort of an objective arbiter saying something, but then that basically.
But who's the moral agent? There's who's the moral agent, right?
Well, in some moral frameworks, God would be the moral agent,
right?
But
not everyone agrees on that.
But then for atheists, so then you have to find the framework by which people that are atheists and people that are theists and people that are deists and believe in all sorts of different gods and people who don't believe in any, how can they function with each other? How can people with different moral frameworks function with each other, for that matter? Because does that mean that anybody that doesn't agree with Jacob shouldn't be sucking air? Does that mean anybody that doesn't agree with me? Does that mean that, there's this level of badness that people shouldn't be able to... I mean, there are all these difficult questions that ultimately the free market kind of solves by bypassing, by coming to that which is common to us all.
By being amoral. And you can't, it's so hard with all these different frameworks that people judge things by. To synthesize all of them is, I'll say it is an impossible task. and to come with an objective measure of bad. Like I just think that's just too. I think that's just kind of an insurmountable thing. So yeah, it's better. It's best to just leave that out of the equation and look at things like value.
Well, going to the next point, wealth is not fixed. People create it and can do so without limit. And I'll actually read from the book. This is on page 17. Virtually all wealth is created by human ingenuity and effort. A few good things come to us for free. The blessed rain, the sunshine, and the air we breathe come to mind. All the rest we must create. Houses, farms, backhoes, clothing, soap, oil, refineries, flat-screen TVs, and every other good thing that supports and enriches our lives, we humans create by transforming raw materials.
Yeah.
The physical stuff from which we fashion those things has always been here. But through the application of our ingenuity, we transform that physical stuff into goods and services we value. The process has no apparent limit because the ability to create new wealth is bounded only by the human imagination, and humans are endlessly imaginative.
Yes. All right. This. Let me see. Let me go to. Oh, I actually have it opened up on my. The ultimate resource. Yeah, that's. I really like that point about essentially how we are the driving force behind the self-correcting system, our brains, and we come up with crazy shit basically. Just for like we're given a goal and we bridge the gap, right? And this ties back to education,
Mm-hmm.
where you give the kid the goal, you give the person the problem, and they bridge the gap. They figure it out.
Yep.
And that's the only way innovation can happen, obviously. And that leads also back to what Charles Tips, I think it was Charles Tips or whoever else said about in the public sphere, like how like innovation just isn't happening.
Mm-hmm. And here we go to the ultimate resource. Some people worry that human wealth and well-being are limited by the finiteness of physical resources, such as oil, materials, and arable land. The worry is needless because, as economist Julian Simon has taught us, the ultimate resource is the human imagination coupled with the human spirit. Human imagination ceaselessly finds new and better ways to satisfy human wants and needs. It literally creates resources. It finds ways to do more with less. It finds substitutes for resources as they get more expensive. In what sense do people literally create resources? They do so by discovering how physical stuff once considered useless can in fact be used.
Yep.
Consider the sticky black stuff that used to gunk up streets in Pennsylvania and Oklahoma. Petroleum. That was not a resource until creatively thinking human beings discovered that it could be refined into kerosene, gasoline, and the like. That discovery turned petroleum into a resource, and I'll have you know that people are now starting to suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and make petroleum out of it. So, or petrol products rather. So, people have found a way of of efficiently using the sun's energy to go and do the opposite of combustion. Reconstitute hydrocarbons. So that's human ingenuity there. Then it talks about fracking, horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing, when people were able to go and drill and not have to drill straight in the middle of the lake and so on. The ultimate resource, the human imagination, coupled with the human spirit, is constantly finding us ways to do more with less. I remember when it took a strong man to crush a beer can in his hand because beer cans were made of thick metal. But people discovered how to make cans with metal so much thinner and lighter, and therefore less expensive, that now anyone can crush a beer can. I remember concerns that LP record albums, the leading technology for recording music, would become terribly expensive as the cost of the vinyl used to make them was rising. Those albums also took up a lot of space in my cabinet. Then came compact discs, which held more songs in less space, and now I can store hundreds of songs on an SD card a little larger than a fingertip.
Yeah.
Heavy books going to Kindles, and transoceanic telephone calls going by copper cable laid across the ocean floor, and now people are using satellites. And as former Saudi Arabian oil minister Sheikh Zaki Yamani said 3 decades ago, the Stone Age did not end for lack of stone, and the oil age will end long before the world runs out of oil.
No,
Human imagination coupled with the human spirit will find a replacement for oil. I wonder what it will be.
that's really awesome.
And this is why
Awesome.
economics are so cool.
Yes.
And it boils down to this fact. The final one, point number 6. Money is not wealth.
Yep. Yes. Really
Ingenuity,
great stuff.
drive, creating
Which
things. That is what wealth comes
which
from.
is I think a big, if we're going to step back and be pointlessly philosophic and moral, is a big um I mean, maybe this is not exactly analogous, the same definition necessarily, but is that people like that's, and part of the reason I think money is not like the ultimate goal, right? um is that the ultimate goal is using the tools that you already are human to the best of their abilities, I think. And you know, creating comfort and value for those that you care about and yourself, etc.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is
Yeah.
the transcendent wealth, suppose, so to
Hmm.
speak.
Yeah. Money is not wealth. I'll take a look at my. I'll take a look, Mr. Sanderson. I'll take a look at my Quora here shortly. I'm first gonna. We'll get through this last little bit of this. In terms of talking that in a money economy, having more money makes one wealthier, ceteris paribus, so other things remaining equal. Nevertheless, strictly speaking, this ain't wealth. We can't eat it, although I suppose I could. Wear it. People kind of have done that, but it's kind of worthless. Build shelters with it, listen to MP3s with it. Its great value to us is as a medium of exchange. It frees us from the limitations of barter. We don't value money in itself, but for what it can buy. As economist Anthony Davies says, money is just a conveyor belt. Ultimately, we trade goods and services not for money, but for other goods and services. In this book, when we think about wealth, let's think about the goods and services we value. What Adam Smith called the necessaries and conveniences of life, and not about money. So ultimately, economics is about getting what we want.
Yes,
And I like getting what I want.
maximizing. Of course.
Do you like getting
Man,
what you want?
I can't say I don't.
Well, in that case, economics is just the soft science for you. Mix it up with a little sociology and finance, and you'll be unstoppable.
Oh yeah, awesome. That's the goal, to be unstoppable.
And we're going to be
Can't.
going through this book little bit by little bit, precept by precept, even though we didn't actually go through too much of the book and we just started talking. Uh, in the subsequent streams,
Yeah.
this is going to be kind of the order of things. and I am really looking forward to it.
Oh yeah,
We're going to be culling
very
sacred
important.
cows. We are going to be dealing with all these difficult subjects, and hopefully not just throwing out easy answers, but substantiating them. And it's
Hmm.
interesting because Jacob said, and I would say that this takes an awful lot of intellectual honesty and humility to admit. If something seems wrong for my moral reasoning, that doesn't necessarily mean that changing the situation would produce a better result. It just means I'm unhappy with it. I'm not yet sure what, if anything, would satisfy me. That's a very admirable thing to be able to
Hmm.
honestly say that. And it also means that that particular struggle, and I'm going to say that I think we all have it to some extent or another, but maybe in a different realm,
Yeah.
it's a personal struggle. It's a personal issue. And in dealing with it, however it is that we deal with it, it's part of our learning and growing process. And the big secret is learning and growing doesn't stop at age 18 or at age 21 or at age 25 or whenever. That stops the day we stop sucking air, consuming food, and the like. That stops the day that we keel over and die.
Hmm.
And so, this developing as a person and learning how to function in the world, which goes back to the principles of pre modernism, pre enlightenment, learning how to function in
Yeah.
the world and with the world rather than trying to strong arm the world,
Yeah. Yes.
um,
Yes.
is
I was
kind
gonna
of our
say that too.
starting point. And it is the basis for the culling of the sacred cows that we do here on stream.
Yes. Exactly. And yeah, no, that does tie interestingly back to I was gonna say that as well. Instead of trying to strong arm the world, as you said, like that sort of, and that spawns in kind of entitlement, right? Um,
Hmm.
Not kind of, definitely entitlement. Um, and it stunts growth, and that's what you see is just a ton of people with completely stunted growth and entitlement problems and the like, and then a bunch of complaining, right? You have a bunch of pontificators or not pontificators. Those exist too, right? But a bunch of whiners, I suppose, and then you have doers, right? And
Hmm.
luckily for us, when there's an abundance of whiners, that just leaves more room for the doers, right?
Well, yeah, the doers will do with the only impediments the doers will have are the fact that the whiners will want to kind of nip at the heels of the
Complain.
doers. Have you read
Yeah,
ever read the Little House on the Prairie series?
I probably have read parts of it when I was young, really young, but it's been so long I don't remember much.
I might misquote this, but I think I'll get the gist of it. Um, if someone is working really hard and works up a sweat, and the only thing someone else can say is "you stink," the reason that comment comes out of their mouth is because they don't have anything to do but to smell.
Yeah, exactly.
So comments like "you
That's
stink,"
really that's really important.
it's just the buzzing of a fly.
Yeah,
It's
literally.
those kinds of comments carry no actual weight in the real world, especially not if there's an emotionally stable foundation. Then that provides the opportunity to maybe feel a little sorry, maybe laugh a little. I don't know, but you know, in a world of people that talk, it really pays to be someone that thinks and someone that does. Someone that actually is
Hmm.
aiming for a goal. Because if you're not
Yep.
aiming for a goal, then, well, you're not going to hit anything. It's not like you're going to stumble upon success. I mean, that sounds like the perfect, self-help book that would make millions, stumbling on success. But the fact of the matter is, that belongs in the fiction section of the store.
Oh yeah.
It doesn't work that way. And if there's anything that you get from this chilling around for 3 hours chatting, I certainly hope it's inspiration to do your thing, inspiration to educate yourself, or to procure for yourself the education that you need. Because ultimately, it's your life, which
Yep.
means that you really can't count on anybody but yourself to make better decisions for yourself than you yourself make. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
we're willing to be a part of it. I mean, and I'm really really honored that you guys have tuned into this stream. But I know you wouldn't be doing it if you weren't getting something for it. You and I wouldn't be putting this, and Stephen wouldn't be showing up on this if we weren't getting something for it.
Mm-hmm.
Just the exchange of ideas and the talking about truth and exploring hard concepts helps us all to grow as people, and as we grow as people together, so also will we grow in our capacity to accomplish what we set out to do. It's amazing
Yep.
how personal growth and financial growth and personal growth and intellectual growth and personal growth and growth in any field that we're
Yeah.
interested in are
Yeah.
inextricably linked. And
Yep.
personal growth always comes first.
Oh yeah. Values created for sure. Yeah, it's definitely a good thing.
We got about 8 minutes left of 7 minutes now left of streaming time. And so, Mr. Stutts, uh, as the honored guest here, the floor is yours.
The floor is mine. Well, let's see. Let me think. Do I have any parting words? Well, um, I'm not gonna not gonna self advertise or anything. I have nothing to promote. Oh,
Steven Stutz is
I
on
guess
Quora. You can search him by his name. The spelling is found underneath his picture. You can also find him
yeah.
as an administrator or whatever you call that role, owner, etc. of the Quora Gifted Support Group blog.
Yeah, definitely check that out if you're interested in that sort of thing. Um, yeah, if anyone has any good employment for me that they could just offer up, that'd be cool too. But that's I
Yeah,
think I'm gonna do that
if you
with
want to
myself.
work with Steven, if you want to work with me, hit us up. I mean, there's Quora is probably the easiest way for one to get a hold of us because I think that both of us are open to
Yeah.
having messages from anybody.
Yep. Yep.
If you want to work with us, if you want us to tag team and tutor you or in something,
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's too. We do.
we
That's always
provide
fun.
value.
Yes. Yeah. No. And yeah, if there's ever any sort of questions about it, any sort of thing that you think I might be able to do, I will definitely give it a shot because it's always fun.
And if you have something you'd like to teach us,
Yeah, that too. I'm open for that as well. That's always great as well. Either way, both ways. It's good stuff. Yeah. See. Oh, also, I guess I should ask. Um. Um. um yeah, if you guys have any like suggestions for content for future streams or like stuff you want to talk about or things you're interested in, put them in the chat for sure.
in the chat, or once this thing gets saved as a
Yeah.
video,
Or Quora.
I'll be Quora would be one. You can put it in the comment section of any one of the threads on the Quora Gifted Support Group. You can put it in the comment section
Especially on
of the
YouTube. Yeah.
video. That would actually probably be the best place to put it
Yep.
once it becomes video and is open for comments.
Yeah.
I'll be
So if you have
modifying it
any
here in the course of the next day or so, putting timestamps and Paul's online math notes and stuff like that into the description.
So if you think of something, because maybe I know on the spot sometimes I don't have anything to say, but I come up with something later. If you have anything, just come back to the video, throw a comment, and we can check the comments, the day prior to it, and check out the stuff that you guys suggest. Because like especially like articles and stuff, because we start by going over articles and content, and it's just like in economics, instead of just central planning where we're just deciding all the articles, it helps when everyone kind of guides what we should be looking at and what you think is interesting. And
Yeah,
and
if you have cool articles that you'd like to see, or things that might raise thoughts and guide us in a different direction. I mean, you might send us an article, and we might find 50 other things on the same subject, and pick one of
want
them
to
or
talk about.
whatever. And but if you'd like
Um,
to have a say in the direction that this goes, this is really for you. So participate, enter the conversation, as I know many of you already do in the chats.
as David says, the exchange of ideas is great. He said, INTJ dealing with an ESFP, my brother.
Oh,
and
oh,
and an,
oh! Ah!
and an ESFPA, assertive one.
I'm sorry.
It's,
I'm sorry. I have to deal with that interpersonal relationship. I'm not gonna divulge the details, but that ain't easy. Oh, just find some
wow.
way of connecting on SE. That's literally the only thing. That's literally the only thing you can do. SE. Oh boy, I'm sorry.
That's so funny.
Oh, I'm sorry.
ESTJ, I'll say ESTJs are the ones that get go from. For me, is just the I don't know the kryptonite, so to speak. the rule people.
I'm getting better at getting along with different kinds of people, but it's still kind of difficult for me, no matter what.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I know. I had exposition about how I was in school. Obviously, I just threw poo in a way. I mean, I guess I was kind of throwing poo at a toilet, so it was kind of apt. But
Yep.
so it's supposed to be happening. But yeah,
Oh yeah. Oh, going back to that subject of education, which is definitely a great one to end on in our final couple minutes or so.
hmm
For any of you that doesn't, I'm guessing that most of you are probably readers and love learning.
yeah,
I highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with educational law around where you're at. Turn yourself into a repository of good information on this matter, so that if people do ever come to you with questions, if people ever do, um, if you wind up talking about these sorts of things with your friends and your family, I, 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 I can't be a repository for everyone. Stephen can't be a repository for everyone. Caleb Beers can't be a repository for everyone because laws everywhere are
are different.
different. But even within the realm of the legal framework, be creative. Use that ingenuity to figure out how to get you and other people what you want.
hmm
Information is cheap, but applying it and getting it in the right framework, that's where the ingenuity, that is where part of the labor comes in. You're
Yeah,
attaching your own ingenuity and labor to ideas and making the reality. So so familiarize yourself with the legal constraints so it doesn't go and bite you in the butt. But within those constraints, and maybe that would necessitate moving at some point, within those constraints, utilizing scarce resources to go with another economics principle, figure out how to make the most of it.
yeah.
And I really look, if we continue doing this for a prolonged period of time, I look forward to seeing where we all wind up being in 5, 10 years.
Oh yeah,
It's going to be awesome.
for sure. It has to be. No way.
Do you have any parting words, Mr. Stutts?
Well, I've already, I guess, said what I had to say. So just goodbye. Thank you for tuning in. Is all I have to say.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. And as Steven said, thank you for tuning in. we will be holding this on Wednesday at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. And I was planning on holding one stream prior to that this week, but a prior engagement got in the way. And then on Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, I will be hosting this with Ylve Thorbjørnsen as my co-host, a lovely dude from Norway with a lot of wisdom of his own to share. So, with that, so Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern, feel free to tune in if you like, and if you don't like, feel free
And
not to
Sunday,
tune
2
in.
p.m.
And Sunday at 2 p.m. Sunday at 2 p.m. is always a go. Thank
All
you.
time zones encompassed, hopefully.
Yes. All right.
Or as many as we can.
We'll talk to you guys later. Bye.